130 people have been executed in Oklahoma. Charles Troy Coleman, September 10, 1990. He was the first person executed in Oklahoma since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976 and the first in the state's history to die by lethal injection. Coleman was a career criminal sentenced to death for the 1979 murder of John Seward. His confirmed and suspected victims included the following: John and Roxy Seward. On February 9, 1979, Coleman broke into a home in Muskogee County and was interrupted by John, 68, and Roxy, 62. He took them to the basement and shot them both with a rare 28-gauge shotgun. While he was responsible for both deaths, he was only officially prosecuted and sentenced to death for the murder of John. Russell Lewis Jr. After escaping from jail while awaiting trial for the Seward murders, Coleman carjacked and fatally shot Lewis in Tulsa on April 26, 1979. He received a second death sentence for this crime, but this was overturned in 1983 due to a jury selection error and was never refiled. During his 1979 escape, Coleman slit the throat of police officer Tom Dodson, who survived, and later he kidnapped Arizona Deputy Terry Parrish, whom he eventually left handcuffed in the desert. Coleman declined an official last meal and refused the standard prison dinner of macaroni goulash, salad, peas, and cornbread. However, at approximately noon on the day of his execution, he accepted and ate a hamburger offered to him by prison officers. His final statement to the witnesses was, "Just tell everybody I love them. I have peace and a quiet heart." As the prison chaplain read from the Gospel of Matthew 7, Coleman's final recorded utterances were, "Praise God, praise God." Robin Leroy Parks, March 10, 1992. Parks was convicted of the 1977 first-degree murder of Abdullah Ibrahim, 24, a college student from Bangladesh who was working as a gas station attendant in Oklahoma City. Prosecutors stated Parks killed Ibrahim because he feared being caught using a stolen credit card to buy gasoline. Ibrahim had noted Parks' license plate number on a scratch pad at the scene before he was killed. Additionally, police recorded conversations where Parks admitted to a friend that he had killed Ibrahim and revealed where the murder weapon was hidden. He declined an official last meal request. His execution was notably botched, taking approximately 11 minutes and involving visible physical distress. His recorded last words were, "Special thanks to Jesse Jackson. Special thanks to Vicky Miles LaGrange and the Black Caucus. Special thanks to Malik Muhammad for his years of assisting me. Thanks to my wife and children." Moments after the drugs began to flow, he reportedly said lightheartedly, "I'm still awake." He looked at his common law wife, Deborah Sutton, and said, "I love you too, Deborah," after she told him she loved him. Following these words, witnesses reported that Parks suffered a violent physical reaction, including muscle spasms and gasping, before being pronounced dead at 12:52 a.m. Olin Randall Robinson, March 13, 1992. Robinson was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder stemming from a botched robbery on June 12, 1980, at a home on the outskirts of Velma, Oklahoma. He and two accomplices, Johnny Glenn Gillum and William Starr Jordan, targeted the home after hearing the residents possessed expensive jewelry. The three victims were Robert Leon Swinford, 41, Julie Sheila Lovejoy, 38, a British citizen visiting her sister, Avril Joan Bork, 42, Swinford's fiancée and also a British citizen. While his accomplices received life sentences, Robinson was sentenced to death for all three murders. His death sentence for the murder of Avril was later overturned in 1988, but the other two death sentences remained in effect. Reports indicate that Robinson did not request an official special last meal. He reportedly ate the standard prison dinner served to other inmates the night before his execution. Robinson, who claimed to have experienced a religious conversion while on death row, maintained his innocence until the end, stating he was passed out in a car during the actual killings. His last recorded words to witnesses were, "I love you, Jesus." He also requested that a prison minister read from the Bible during the procedure, a passage that includes the verse, "Even though I was once a blasphemer and a persecutor and a violent man, I was shown mercy because I acted in ignorance and unbelief." Thomas Joseph Grasso, March 20, 1995. His execution was the result of a high-profile tug-of-war between Oklahoma and New York, as he had committed murders in both states. Grasso was convicted of 2 murders committed during robberies. Hilda Johnson, 87. On Christmas Eve 1990, Grasso strangled Johnson in her Tulsa, Oklahoma home using her own Christmas tree lights. He stole approximately $12 and her TV set, which he later sold for $125. Leslie Holtz, 81. 6 months later, in July 1991, Grasso murdered Holtz in Staten Island, New York, to steal a Social Security check. Grasso was already serving a sentence of 20 years to life in New York when he was extradited to Oklahoma to face the death penalty for the Johnson murder, a move facilitated by then-Governor George Pataki. Grasso's request for a last meal was exceptionally specific and extensive. He had 2 dozen steamed mussels and 2 dozen steamed clams with lemon, a Burger King double cheeseburger, half a dozen barbecued spare ribs, 2 strawberry milkshakes, half a pumpkin pie with whipped cream and diced strawberries, and a can of SpaghettiOs with meatballs specifically requested to be served at room temperature. Grasso is best known for his final statement, which expressed his disappointment that a portion of his last meal request had not been met exactly. "I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." Shortly before this, he also released a written statement concluding with, "I hope everyone will treat each other so this act need not be repeated. Words break under this burden. Farewell." Roger Dale Stafford, July 1st, 1995. Known as one of the most hated inmates in the state's history, his execution ended a 15-year stay on death row for a series of brutal murders committed during the bloody summer of 1978. Stafford was convicted of 9 counts of first-degree murder across 2 separate incidents. The Lawrence family, June 22, 1978. Stafford, along with his wife Verna and brother Harold, lured the family to stop on Interstate 35 near Purcell, Oklahoma, by feigning car trouble. They robbed and murdered all 3 family members: Melvin Lawrence, 38, Linda Lawrence, 31, and Richard Lawrence, who was only 12 years old. Sirloin Stockade Massacre, July 16, 1978. 3 weeks later, the trio robbed a Sirloin Stockade restaurant in Oklahoma City. They forced 6 employees into a walk-in meat cooler and gunned them down to eliminate witnesses. The victims were Isaac Freeman, 56, Louis Zacharias, 43, Terry Horst, 15, David Lindsay, 17, David Salzman, 16, and Anthony Tew, 17. While he held death sentences for all 9 murders, he was officially executed for the murders of the Lawrence family, while appeals for the restaurant massacre were still pending. Stafford requested a substantial final meal, which he ate at approximately 12:30 p.m. on the day before his execution. He wanted 6-foot-long chili dogs with cheese, a large order of French fries with ketchup and mustard, and 2 large chocolate milkshakes. Additionally, at 5:20 p.m., he was granted a final request for 1 pint of chocolate ice cream. Stafford maintained his innocence until the very end. His final statement to witnesses was, "I'd like to tell the world that you're seeing an innocent man murdered. Somewhere, somehow, someplace, somebody, please exonerate me and give me the peace of giving my name back." As the lethal drugs began to take effect, his final recorded words were, "Oh God." Stafford's case remains infamous not only for the brutality of the crimes, but also for a final act of taunting. 2 days after his execution, the Assistant Attorney General received a $5 Sirloin Stockade gift certificate in the mail from Stafford, scrawled with a message again claiming his innocence. Robert Allen Brechin, August 11, 1995. His execution was preceded by a highly unusual medical emergency that caused a 2-hour delay. Brechin was sentenced to death for the 1983 murder of Marie Stubbs, 59, a prominent resident of Ardmore, Oklahoma. On March 17, 1983, Brechin broke into the Stubbs rural home with the intent of robbery. During the burglary, he shot Marie Stubbs once in the head with a .22 caliber rifle while she was in her bed. Prosecutors stated the crime occurred after Marie's husband, Hilton Stubbs, had refused to give Brechin a $400 loan a few weeks prior. Hours before his scheduled midnight execution, guards found Brechin unconscious in his cell from an apparent drug overdose of sedatives and anti-anxiety pills he had hoarded. He was rushed to a local hospital where his stomach was pumped to revive him. Once stabilized and deemed medically fit for execution, he was returned to the penitentiary and put to death. Brechin did not request a special last meal. He also declined the standard prison dinner of beef stew, noodles, cornbread, grape juice, and fruit served to other inmates. Because of technical issues with the execution chamber's microphone, his final statement was mostly inaudible to witnesses. However, prison officials later reported that he said something to the effect of, "Just tell everybody I love them and thank them for what they've done for me." He reportedly expressed love for his parents and did not mention his suicide attempt or the overdose. The decision to revive Robert Allen Brechin so he could be executed sparked a significant debate over the Eighth Amendment's protection against cruel and unusual punishment. The state argued that under the law, an inmate must be conscious and aware of why they are being punished. By pumping his stomach and reviving him, Oklahoma officials claimed they were fulfilling their legal obligation to ensure he was mentally and physically present for his sentence. Brechin's attorneys filed emergency appeals, arguing that it was barbaric to provide life-saving medical treatment for the sole purpose of killing the patient hours later. They likened it to nursing someone back to health just to shoot them. The U.S. Supreme Court denied an emergency stay of execution. The court's silence effectively upheld the state's right to proceed once Brechin was stabilized. An internal investigation by the Oklahoma Department of Corrections revealed that Brechin had likely hoarded over 100 sedative pills, phenobarbital and diazepam, over several months. The incident led to stricter mouth checks and pill-crushing protocols for death row inmates in Oklahoma to prevent future suicide by overdose attempts. Benjamin Brewer, April 26, 1996. Brewer was convicted of the 1978 murder of Karen Joyce Stapleton, 20, an accounting student at Tulsa Junior College. On August 16, 1978, Brewer broke into Stapleton's apartment in Tulsa. He essayed her and stabbed her more than 20 times. According to prosecutors, Brewer confessed to the assault and admitted he sat on her couch and watched her as she died. He was later caught driving her car with the murder weapon and one of her rings in his possession. Brewer declined to order a special last meal. Instead, he was served the standard prison dinner provided to other inmates that evening, which consisted of pork chops, mashed potatoes and gravy, greens, bread, and iced tea. When asked if he had a final statement before the execution began, Brewer simply replied no. He remained silent throughout the procedure, keeping his eyes closed and refusing to look at the witnesses. Notably, his execution was the first in Oklahoma history to be viewed by the victim's family via closed-circuit television under a new state law. Stephen Keith Hatch, August 9, 1996. He was the eighth person executed in Oklahoma since the state resumed the death penalty, and notably the first in modern times to be executed for a crime where someone else pulled the trigger. Hatch was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of shooting with intent to kill for the events of October 15, 1979 in Okarche, Oklahoma. Hatch and his accomplice, Glenn Burton Ake, entered the home of the Douglas family. They hog-tied the family and terrorized them for hours, during which the daughter was also essayed. Reverend Richard Douglas, 43, and his wife Marilyn Douglas, 38, were shot in the back and killed. Their children, Brooks, 16, and Leslie, 12, were also shot, but they survived the attack. While Ake was the one who actually shot all 4 family members, Hatch was sentenced to death for his role as an accomplice. Interestingly, Ake's death sentence was eventually overturned and replaced with life imprisonment, meaning the triggerman survived while the accomplice was executed. Hatch requested and received a substantial last meal served the evening before his execution. He had barbecued ribs and a baked potato, chef's salad with blue cheese dressing, corn on the cob and baked beans, hot rolls with butter, pecan pie with ice cream, and iced tea. When Warden Ron Ward asked for a final statement in the execution chamber, Hatch replied no. He remained silent during the procedure and never opened his eyes. However, he left behind a written final statement addressed to his friends and brothers on death row, urging them to stand up and be strong and never give up hope or your faith. Get involved in fighting for your rights and the wrongs that have been brought upon you. Scott Don Carpenter, May 8, 1997. At 22 years old, he was the youngest person executed in the U.S. since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Carpenter was convicted of the 1994 murder of 56-year-old A.J. Kelly at the Dutchess Creek Bait and Grocery Store in McIntosh County, Oklahoma. On February 6, 1994, the 19-year-old stabbed Kelly in the neck and back. He was caught quickly after being seen by customers. Due to his desire to avoid a life sentence, Carpenter pleaded no contest and waived all appeals. For his last meal on May 7, 1997, Carpenter requested a meal consisting of barbecue, sides, and dessert. Scott Don Carpenter's last words, spoken shortly before he was pronounced dead at 12:21 a.m., were, "I'm ready to go. I'm going home." He also added a final spiritual sentiment: "I'm going to be with my Lord and Savior. I'm ready to go." He remained calm during the procedure and smiled at his mother, who was present as a witness. Michael Edward Long, February 20, 1998. Long was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder for the brutal killings of a co-worker and her young child on April 7, 1987. Cheryl Sandra Graber was 24 years old, a co-worker of Long's at a local flower shop. Long went to her home and attacked her after she rejected his advances. She was stabbed 31 times and shot twice in the head and abdomen. Andrew Graber was 5 years old and Cheryl's son. He was killed because he witnessed the attack on his mother. He was shot twice at point-blank range and stabbed. Long later blamed the crimes on a combination of depression, drug abuse, and alcohol. His last meal consisted of a McDonald's Big Mac, a large pizza, fruit pies, and sodas. His final statement included a religious parable and a plea for repentance. Stephen Edward Wood, August 5, 1998. Wood was sentenced to death for a murder committed while already serving life sentences for 2 previous killings. Robert Bruce Brigden was killed in 1994. While incarcerated at the Oklahoma State Reformatory, Wood stabbed Brigden, a former minister serving time for child molestation, 7 times with a homemade knife. Charles Rusty Stevens and James Johnson were killed in 1992. Prior to the prison slaying, Wood was serving life without parole for these murders, 2 men described as transients whom he stabbed dozens of times and left under a bridge in Lincoln County. Wood had no final statement. Witnesses noted he remained silent throughout the process. He spent his final hours quietly and declined TV or phone access. Wood was the first Oklahoma inmate since 1966 to be executed specifically for the murder of another prisoner. Tuan An Nguyen, December 10, 1998. He was executed on his 39th birthday. Nguyen was convicted of the May 1982 stabbing murders of his estranged wife and 2 young children related to her in their Tulsa home. Donna Sue Nguyen was 20 years old and she was stabbed 26 times. Joseph Jerome White was 6 and he was his wife's cousin's son who was stabbed 17 times. Amanda Jo White was just 3 years old. She was his wife's cousin's daughter, who was stabbed 22 times. When asked for a final statement, Nguyen reportedly struggled to speak, saying, there's nothing to say. He did not request a special final meal. His execution was a subject of protest by human rights groups as it occurred on International Human Rights Day and amid concerns regarding his deteriorating mental health. Prosecutors stated that Nguyen killed his 20-year-old wife as an act of revenge because she intended to divorce him. Court records indicate a pattern of jealous and possessive behavior. Roughly a week before the murders, Nguyen had moved out of the duplex they shared with the White family. Evidence presented at trial included a previous altercation where Nguyen had attempted to drag Donna out of the house by her neck while they were separated. According to the Tulsa County District Attorney, Nguyen killed Joseph and Amanda because they were witnesses to the attack on his wife. The jury found the children's murders to be especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, noting that the children were likely awakened after midnight and struggled before they died. Nguyen spared his own infant son, who was found physically unharmed in his crib at the scene. Defense attorneys later argued that Nguyen's actions were influenced by undiagnosed mental disorders, including PTSD stemming from his experiences as a refugee. John Wayne Duvall, December 17, 1998. He was convicted of the September 15, 1986 murder of his estranged wife in their Duncan, Oklahoma home. Carla K. Duvall was 30 years old. During an argument, Duvall stabbed her 25 times using various kitchen knives and a meat fork. After the stabbing, he finished the killing by suffocating her with a pillow. Following the murder, he initially planned to commit suicide but later walked into the Stevens County Courthouse and confessed the crime to a county commissioner. Duval expressed remorse and religious faith, stating, "I just like to thank God for His Son and my Savior Jesus Christ and ask forgiveness for my sins. Thank you for the family I have and their unconditional love and support." He concluded with a short prayer for mercy. For his final meal, Duval requested and received a steak sandwich, onion rings, a large chocolate milkshake, and bottled water. John Walter Castro Sr., January 7, 1999. He was 37 years old at the time of his death and became the 14th person executed in Oklahoma since the state reinstated the death penalty. Castro was a twice convicted murderer who killed two women in separate incidents in 1983. Beulah Grace Sisson Cox was 31 years old. On April 18, 1983, Cox, a mother of two and student at Oklahoma State University, picked up Castro while he was hitchhiking near Stillwater. Castro stole her car at gunpoint and, despite assuring her he would not harm her, shot her in the head several times and left her body near Lake McMurtry. Rhonda Papon was 29. Approximately 3 months later, on July 14, 1983, Castro robbed the Hobo Tea restaurant in Ponca City. Papon, the owner-manager and mother of two, attempted to defend herself with a knife, but she was overpowered by Castro, who stabbed her to death. Castro later admitted in an interview that he likely would have continued killing had he not been apprehended. Before the execution began, Castro addressed the victims' families. "I don't know who's behind that one-way glass, but whoever is here from the Cox family, I am sorry for what I did. And anybody who is here from the Papon family, I am sorry." He also criticized the state's decision to execute minors, referring to his 16-year-old son being barred from witnessing the execution before concluding with, "I love you, let's do it." For his final meal request, Castro ate a large thick crust pizza with everything but anchovies, a strawberry milkshake, and a half a dozen glazed donuts. Sean Richard Sellers, February 4, 1999. His case gained international attention because he was just 16 at the time of his crimes, making him the only person in the U.S. executed for a crime committed at that age. Sellers was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder involving 2 separate incidents. Robert Paul Bauer was killed on September 8, 1985. He was a 36-year-old convenience store clerk in Oklahoma City. Sellers shot him because the clerk refused to sell him beer, and, as Sellers later admitted, he just wanted to see what it feels like to kill somebody. Vonda Belofato was 32 years old, and Paul Lee Belofato was 43. They were killed on March 5, 1986. They were shot in the head while they slept in their bedroom. Vonda Belofato was his mother, and Paul was his stepfather. At trial, his defense claimed he was a practicing Satanist suffering from demonic possession and Dungeons and Dragons addiction, though he later converted to Christianity and claimed multiple personality disorder. Sellers addressed the families of his victims, stating, "All the people that are hating me right now, when you wake up in the morning, you're not going to feel any different. Reach out to God and He will be there for you." He then told the warden, "Let's do it, Gary. Let's get it on." He died while singing the hymn, "Set My Spirit Free." Sellers requested and received a last meal of Chinese food, specifically egg rolls, sweet and sour shrimp, and batter fried shrimp. Scotty Lee Moore, June 3, 1999. Moore was convicted of the November 18, 1983 first-degree murder of his former employer during an armed robbery in Oklahoma City. Alex Fernandez was 42. He was the desk clerk at the airline motel and had fired Moore approximately 1 month prior to the crime for allegedly stealing $97. Accompanied by his cousin and girlfriend, Vicky Castor, Moore entered the motel with a stolen .22 caliber rifle. According to testimony, Moore told Castor, "Dead people can't talk," before leading Fernandez to a back room. While Fernandez lay face down on the floor, Moore shot him 5 times in the head. The jury found 4 aggravating circumstances, including that the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel, and committed to avoid arrest or prosecution. Moore made no final statement. Witnesses noted he died quietly, without saying anything inside the execution chamber. He did not request a special last meal. Instead, he was offered the standard prison dinner menu for that day, which included hamburgers, French fries, fruit, and peanut butter cake. Moore's execution proceeded after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final appeals and the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board denied clemency in a 4-1 vote. Norman Lee Newstead, July 8, 1999. He was sentenced to death for the February 20, 1984 murder and robbery of a taxi driver in Tulsa. Larry Donnell Buckley was 26 years old. He picked up Newstead from the Tulsa International Airport. After Newstead failed to find his sister's address, they stopped at a church to ask for directions. Newstead then shot Buckley twice in the back of the head and left his body and the cab in a creek. In addition to this murder, Newstead was a convicted spree killer responsible for a triple murder in Utah just 6 days prior. Patricia Frey was 23, Robert Bull was 33, and Ronald Schmidt was 24. On Valentine's Day 1984, Newstead and an accomplice, Douglas Edward Kay, robbed and shot these three victims at the Playhouse Bar in Cedar City, Utah. Newstead received 3 consecutive life sentences for these killings, but he was executed for the Oklahoma murder. He gave no official final statement. However, as the lethal drugs were administered, he reportedly looked at the warden and exclaimed, "I can taste it." For his final meal, he requested and received 5 tacos, 5 glazed donuts, and a vanilla milkshake. Newstead was one of the few white defendants in U.S. history to be executed for the murder of an African American victim. Cornell Cooks, December 2, 1999. Cooks was convicted of the October 1982 murder of his elderly neighbor in Lawton, Oklahoma. Jenny Ridling was 87. Ridling was a disabled woman whom Cooks had previously known because he mowed her lawn. During a burglary and ransacking of her home, Cooks beat, essayed, and gagged the 87-year-old victim. She eventually suffocated to death after a piece of window curtain was wrapped tightly around her head. A co-defendant, Rodney Masters, was also convicted, but he received a life sentence as the jury found Cooks to be more culpable in the physical assault. In his final moments, Cooks expressed deep gratitude to the victim's family, who had sent him a letter of forgiveness earlier that day. He stated, "It means a lot to me to get a letter from the victim's relatives to say I've been forgiven. A lot of people didn't expect a person like me to change. Keep peace with your soul, strive to be happy, and keep God in your life." Cooks requested a substantial final meal consisting of catfish with hush puppies and tartar sauce, tater tots with ketchup, a steak sandwich, banana pudding with vanilla wafers, strawberry ice cream, and a Coke. His execution proceeded after the U.S. Supreme Court denied 2 last-minute appeals and the State Pardon and Parole Board rejected clemency in a 5-0 vote. Bobby Lynn Ross, December 9, 1999. Ross was convicted of the January 5, 1983 first-degree murder of a police officer and robbery with a firearm in Elk City. Sergeant Stephen Mahan was 30 years old. He was on patrol during an icy morning when he interrupted a robbery at the Los Cuartos Inn. Ross confronted the officer in the motel parking lot. He ordered him to drop his weapon and lie face down on the ground, and then shot him 3 times in the head at close range. Fellow officers described the killing as an execution-style shooting of a disarmed and powerless man. Ross provided a taped confession to the crime, at one point sobbing and stating, "Whatever happens to me, I deserve it. I do. I deserve it." Ross delivered a lengthy and emotional final statement focused on forgiveness. "I'd like to say forgive me to the Mahan family. I'm going to ask that you all forgive me as the Lord has forgiven me. If I do not forgive, neither will my Father in heaven forgive me." He concluded by saying, "Thank you." He did not make a special last meal request. Malcolm Rent Johnson, January 6, 2000. He was the first person executed in the U.S. in the 21st century. Johnson was sentenced to death for the October 1981 essay and murder of an elderly woman in Oklahoma City. Ura Alma Thompson was 76. She was found dead in her apartment. Thompson had been beaten, essayed, and suffocated to death. Police arrested Johnson on an unrelated weapons charge and found several of Thompson's belongings in his apartment, including her keys, a watch, and jewelry. His conviction relied heavily on testimony from Joyce Gilchrist, a police chemist later disgraced for falsifying evidence. A 2001 review by other scientists found that the genetic material Gilchrist claimed to have matched to Johnson was not actually present on the evidence slides. In his final moments, maintaining his innocence, Johnson said he had peace and was going to heaven. For his last meal, he requested fried chicken, shrimp, tater tots, pecan pie, ice cream, and biscuits. Gary Allen Walker, January 13, 2000. He was a prolific serial killer and rapist, often referred to as the roaming rapist, who committed a 19-day murder spree across Oklahoma and Kentucky in May 1984. Walker was convicted and confessed to 5 murders, as well as multiple kidnappings and essays. While he received several life sentences for his other crimes, he was executed specifically for the murder of Eddie Cash. Cash was 63 years old. On May 7, 1984, he picked up Walker while he was hitchhiking. That evening, Walker went to Cash's home in Broken Arrow, struck him in the head with a brick, and strangled him with a vacuum cleaner cord. Jane K. Hilburn was 35. She was murdered on May 14, 1984, in Vinita. She was strangled in her home. Janet D. Jewell was 32. She was kidnapped, essayed, and strangled on May 23, 1984, in Beggs. Valerie Shaw Hartzell was 25. She was a Tulsa radio reporter kidnapped from a shopping mall on May 24, 1984. She was held for 24 hours, essayed, and strangled before her body was dumped near Claremore. Margaret Bell Leidick was 37. She was kidnapped from Poteau, Oklahoma, then essayed, tortured, and murdered. Walker delivered his final statement, repeatedly apologizing to the victims' families, stating, "I can only ask for your forgiveness. I hope when I go that the hate you have, you would let it go with me." He also spoke of God and mentioned leaving the world with nothing but love in his heart. For his final meal, Walker requested 3 cheeseburgers with extra salt, 3 sliced tomatoes, French fries, and a strawberry malt. Walker's defense at trial focused on his history of severe mental illness and childhood abuse, claiming he was in a psychotic state and confused his first victim with his abusive stepfather. Michael Donald Roberts, February 10, 2000. Roberts was sentenced to death for the January 16, 1988 murder of his 80-year-old neighbor Lula Mae Brooks in Oklahoma City. Brooks was killed in her home during a burglary. She had been stabbed in the neck and head, and her throat was slit. She ultimately drowned in her own blood. Prosecutors described Roberts as a walking crime wave because he also confessed to 19 other burglaries and 1 count of essay during his interrogation. He initially confessed to the crime, claiming Brooks attacked him with a knife and he killed her to finish the job. He later recanted, alleging detectives coerced the confession by offering him a shorter sentence. In his final words, Roberts criticized the execution process, calling it wrong and asking for forgiveness for those involved, while also expressing love for his family. For his last meal, he requested a large final meal, which included multiple items like barbecue ribs, a Cornish hen, a cheeseburger, and drinks. Kelly Lamont Rogers, March 23, 2000. He was 31 years old and had spent just over 8 years on death row, one of the shortest durations in state history for an inmate who had not waived his appeals. Rogers was convicted for the December 19, 1990 robbery, essay, and murder of a college student in Stillwater. Karen Marie Laufenberger was 21. She was an Oklahoma State University interior design student who was working part-time as a pizza delivery person. After she delivered the pizza to the apartment of Rogers' girlfriend, Rogers followed her at knife point. He robbed her of approximately $40, forced her to withdraw another $175 from an ATM, and then took her to her own apartment. There, he essayed her and stabbed her 9 times in the chest, neck, and abdomen. In addition to the death penalty, Rogers was sentenced to 325 years in prison for the associated charges of essay, robbery, and larceny. In his last words, he addressed the victim's family directly, stating, "To the Laufenberger family, I just pray you guys will find peace and that God will heal you from the inside out." He also urged witnesses to trust in Jesus as their Lord and Savior. For his final meal request, he received 5 drumsticks, 4 thighs, mashed potatoes and gravy, coleslaw, double chocolate cake, and a large Sprite. The victim's parents witnessed the execution and released a statement calling it a final act of justice while expressing sympathy for Rogers' own family. Ronald Keith Boyd, April 27, 2000. He was convicted of the January 7, 1986 first-degree murder of a police officer following an armed robbery in Oklahoma City. Master Patrolman Richard Oldham Riggs was 32. Officer Riggs was investigating an armed robbery at a convenience store called Tom's Market. He and his partner, Rookie Officer Craig Gravel, spotted a van at a nearby Phillips 66 gas station that matched the description of the getaway vehicle. Boyd was using a payphone outside the van as Riggs approached. When the officer instructed Boyd to remove his hands from his coat pockets, Boyd fired twice through his pockets. One shot hit Riggs in the abdomen. Boyd then allegedly placed the gun against the officer's chest and fired a second fatal shot. Boyd maintained his innocence, claiming a hitchhiker shot the officer and that no gunpowder residue was found on his hands. However, prosecutors argued he had 24 hours to wash his hands before arrest and cited eyewitness testimony from the scene. Shortly before being executed, Boyd turned toward his family in the witness room and said, "I want to tell my family I love them. I'm all right. I'm at peace with God. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. I'm okay, y'all." For his final meal request, Boyd received 6 or more pieces of catfish, French fries, 3 or 4 plums, a half-pound of green grapes, strawberry shortcake, and a large cherry Sprite. The execution was attended by Officer Riggs' mother, Betty, who had promised at her son's funeral 14 years earlier that she would live to see his killer brought to justice. Charles Adrian Foster, May 25, 2000. Foster was convicted of the April 1, 1983 robbery and first-degree murder of a 74-year-old grocery store owner in Muskogee. Claude Wiley often delivered groceries to the poor. He was making a delivery to Foster's home when the attack occurred. Foster ambushed Wiley behind the front door, repeatedly beating him with a Louisville Slugger baseball bat. While the victim was still alive, Foster wrapped him in a blanket, drove him to a wooded area, and stabbed him 3 times in the chest. Foster consistently maintained his innocence, claiming his wife, Eula Mae Collins, was the real killer. His defense team later highlighted that he had an IQ of 64 and suffered from documented brain damage. When asked for a final statement, Foster replied, "No, sir, I have none." However, as the procedure began, he mouthed the words to Psalm 23 while a chaplain read it and answered yes when asked if he believed in God. He spent his final afternoon with his lawyer and spiritual advisors, maintaining a deep abiding faith. There are no records of his last meal. James Glenn Robideau, June 1, 2000. Robideau was convicted of the September 22, 1985 murder and dismemberment of his girlfriend in Oklahoma City. Nancy Rose Lee McKinney was 37. McKinney disappeared from the apartment she shared with Robideau. Neighbors reported hearing loud jumping noises for several hours on the night of the murder. Months after her disappearance, her skull, one leg, and one arm were discovered in various rural locations in Logan and Oklahoma counties. Prosecutors theorized Robideau used a saw and knife to dissect her while she may have still been alive, disposing of her parts in trash bags. At the time of McKinney's death, Robideau was on probation for the 1978 strangulation murder of his first wife, Linda Sue Robideau. In his last words, Robideau addressed his father and the victim's family, saying, "Dad, I just want you to know I love you. Tell Mother I love her. I'll see you again. To the McKinneys, God bless you all. I'm going to be all right. I love you." For his final request, Robideau ate a double meat cheeseburger with onions and mayo, French fries, and a large strawberry milkshake. Robideau's execution was witnessed by 12 members of the McKinney family, some of whom expressed that his death was too easy compared to the nature of his crimes. Roger James Burgett, June 8, 2000. He was 39 years old and had spent 13 years on death row after pleading guilty to a random carjacking and murder. Burgett was convicted of the October 19, 1985 murder of a popular Moore school teacher during a robbery in Oklahoma City. Rick Lee Patterson was 33. He was a math teacher at Moore Central Mid High School who was abducted from a grocery store parking lot. Burgett and an accomplice, Michael Smith, forced Patterson into the trunk of his own car and drove to a deserted area near Interstate 40. After discovering Patterson had freed his hands in the trunk, they tied him to a tree and shot him twice in the head with a 12-gauge shotgun. Burgett also confessed to the separate murder of James Meadows in Hughes County, though he was executed specifically for the Patterson case. While Burgett received the death penalty, Michael Smith's original death sentence was overturned and later reduced to life in prison without parole. Burgett had no final statement. When the warden asked if he had anything to say, he simply replied, "No, sir." He reportedly remained calm and appeared to have a slight smile as the procedure began. For his final meal request, he ate 2 bacon cheeseburgers, a large order of onion rings, an extra large root beer, and a pint of chocolate ice cream. William Clifford Bryson, June 15, 2000. Bryson was convicted of the August 26, 1988 murder of his lover's husband in a murder for hire and insurance fraud plot. James Earl Plants was 33. The victim was a newspaper pressman for the Oklahoman. Bryson, then 18, and an accomplice, Clinton Eugene McKimble, ambushed Plants as he returned home from a night shift. They beat him severely with baseball bats provided by Plant's wife, Marilyn K. Plants. While Plants was still alive, they drove him to a remote location, doused him and his pickup truck with gasoline, and set it on fire to make the death look like an accident. Prosecutors established that Marilyn Plants hired Bryson, with whom she was romantically involved, to kill her husband to collect on life insurance policies worth approximately $300,000. Marilyn Plants was also sentenced to death and executed in 2001. McKimble received a life sentence after testifying against them. Bryson offered an apology to the victim's family and especially his children, saying, "To Trina and Chris, I'd like to let them know how sorry I am. Get over the pain and get on with your life." He also expressed love for his own father and family members present. For his final request, Bryson received 10 fried shrimp, a salad, a strawberry drink, a slice of German chocolate cake, a pint of ice cream, and a hot apple fritter. Greg Francis Brown, July 20, 2000. He was 39 years old and was a self-confessed spree killer who murdered 5 people across 3 states during a week-long robbery rampage in 1989. Brown was executed specifically for the May 29, 1989 murder of a convenience store clerk in Ardmore, Oklahoma, though his spree claimed 4 other lives. Gwendolyn Sue Miller was 30. She was the victim in the Oklahoma case. Brown shot her in the head with a .25 caliber handgun after robbing her store of $100. His other victims were Mary Gline, 75, killed during a home robbery in Garden City, Kansas; Pete and Barbara Kelschuer, a couple murdered in Pampa, Texas; Geraldine Jerry Case, 61, a clerk killed in Farmington, New Mexico. Brown's defense team, led by his mother, argued that he suffered from organic brain damage and he was not in his right mind during the killings. However, Brown himself often stated he deserved the death penalty. In his final moments, Brown addressed the families of his victims, saying, "I'm sorry for all the pain I've caused. I want to thank the victims' families for their letters of forgiveness. They've helped me more than anything else." He concluded with, "I'm ready to go home." For his last meal, Brown ate 2 double cheeseburgers, a large order of French fries, a strawberry milkshake, and a cherry limeade. Notably, Brown's case involved a rare video clemency plea from his mother, which was ultimately rejected by the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board. George Kent Wallace, August 10, 2000. Wallace, known as the Mad Paddler, was a serial killer who targeted young boys by impersonating a police officer. He was executed for the first-degree murders of 2 Arkansas teenagers whose bodies were found in the same pod in LeFleur County, Oklahoma. William Von Erich Domer was 15. He disappeared in February 1987 while running an errand in Fort Smith. His body was found 5 days later. Mark Anthony McLaughlin was 14. He disappeared in November 1990 from Van Buren. His body was found the next day in the same pond. Both victims had been beaten with a wooden paddle before being shot and stabbed. Wallace was captured after an 18-year-old Ross Ferguson survived a similar attack in December 1990 and escaped in Wallace's car. While on death row, Wallace also confessed to the 1976 and 1982 murders of 2 individuals in North Carolina. He offered no final statement. He remained silent as the lethal drugs were administered. For his last meal, Wallace received 8 pieces of fried chicken, 4 biscuits, and a pint of banana pudding-flavored frozen custard. He notably did not request a drink. His execution was the first in Oklahoma history to be conducted in the evening rather than at midnight. Eddie Leroy Trice, January 9, 2001. Trice was convicted of the February 14, 1987 robbery and brutal assault of his neighbors in Oklahoma City. Ernestine Jones was 84. Trice broke into her home through a bedroom window and savagely beat her with a martial arts weapon, nunchaku. She suffered multiple severe injuries, including a fractured jaw, broken ribs, and internal organ damage, and she was also essayed. She died several hours later from blunt force trauma. Emmanuel Jones was 63. He was Ernestine's mentally retarded son who attempted to defend his mother, and he was also severely beaten with a hammer and nunchaku. He survived the attack but suffered permanent injuries, including the loss of an eye. Trice stole approximately $300 to $500 during the robbery, which he reportedly used for a drug and alcohol binge immediately following the crime. In his final statement, Trice focused on his family and remorse for the victims. He stated, "I want to thank my family for everything they've done. I want to tell the victim's family that I am sorry. I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me." For his final meal, Trice had fried chicken, potatoes with onions, hot rolls, sweet potato pie, and a Coke. Trice's execution proceeded after the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board denied his clemency request in a 4-0 vote. His defense had argued for mercy based on a history of severe childhood abuse and a low IQ. Wanda Jean Allen, January 11, 2001. She was the first woman executed in Oklahoma since its statehood in 1907 and the first black woman executed in the U.S. since 1954. Allen was sentenced to death for the December 1, 1988 murder of her girlfriend, Gloria Jean Leathers, 29. Following a domestic dispute at a grocery store, Leathers and her mother drove to a police station to file a complaint against Allen. Allen followed them, and as Leathers exited the car in the police station parking lot, shot her once in the abdomen. Leathers died from the injury 4 days later. At the time of the murder, Allen was on probation for the manslaughter of another girlfriend, Dedra Pettis. Allen had initially claimed that shooting was an accident, but forensic evidence indicated the victim had been pistol whipped and shot at point-blank range. While strapped to the gurney, Allen's final words were, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do." She also stuck her tongue out and smiled at her attorney, David Presson. Public records of her specific last meal are not widely detailed in major contemporary reports, though she reportedly expressed concern just days before the execution that her legal investigator had not eaten a good breakfast. The execution drew national attention and protests led by figures like Reverend Jesse Jackson due to concerns regarding Allen's low IQ, measured at 69, and potential organic brain damage from childhood injuries. Floyd Allen Medlock, January 16, 2001. On February 19, 1990, 7-year-old Catherine Cathy Ann Bush was riding her bicycle at the Wood Oaks Apartments in Yukon, Oklahoma. She stopped at an apartment where she had previously lived, now occupied by the 19-year-old Medlock. Medlock invited her in, fed her potato chips, and began making macaroni and cheese. He later told police something clicked, or a voice he called Charlie, an alter ego, told him to kill her. Medlock choked the girl until she lost consciousness, then attempted to drown her in a toilet bowl for roughly 10 minutes. When she survived the drowning attempt, he stabbed her in the back of the neck with a steak knife, which broke, and then a hunting knife. He essayed her body before wrapping it in a blanket and discarding it, along with her bicycle, in a nearby dumpster. Medlock's requested last meal included Pebbles cereal, 6 glazed donuts, an assortment of McDonald's fast food. He did not offer an apology to the victim's family. After greeting several family members and witnesses with a hi, his final statement was, "You'll take it easy." The case became notable for a public split between the victims' grandmothers. Judy Bush, paternal, founded a support group for homicide survivors and advocated for the execution. Johnny Cabrera, maternal, became chairwoman of the Oklahoma Coalition to abolish the death penalty and witnessed the execution as a guest of Medlock, having forgiven him through prison correspondence. Dion Athanasius Smallwood, January 18, 2001. On February 5, 1992, Smallwood murdered Lois Frederick, the 66-year-old adoptive mother of his ex-girlfriend, Terry Jo Frederick. Resentful that Lois was keeping him away from her daughter, Smallwood forced his way into her home. He beat her with a croquet mallet with enough force to knock her dentures across the room. He wrapped her limp but still living body in a bedspread and placed her in the back seat of her own car. After driving for several hours and purchasing gasoline, he parked in a rural area and set the car on fire. An autopsy determined that Lois Frederick was burned alive, likely dying from a combination of smoke inhalation and the initial head trauma. Smallwood's requested last meal consisted of 2 pizzas, strawberry ice cream, a basket of strawberries. He offered an apology to the victim's daughter, who was present to witness the execution. His final words included, "To the victims of this case, if you didn't hear me before, hear me now. I'm sorry. This execution doesn't change anything. It just creates more victims. I am truly sorry. I'll be waiting for you all on the other side, all right? Don't forget me." Terry Joe Frederick stated afterward that his apology meant nothing and that she would finally have peace knowing he had paid for his crimes. Mark Andrew Fowler, January 23, 2001. On July 3, 1985, Fowler, then 20, and his accomplice, Billy Ray Fox, then 19, robbed a grocery store in Edmond, Oklahoma. Fox was a former employee of the store who had been fired 6 months prior. The pair herded 3 night shift employees into the store's stockroom. Despite the victims being face down and offering no resistance, they were killed execution style to eliminate witnesses. Rick Cast was 33. He was the night manager. He died from a single shotgun wound to the head. Chumpon Chaosin was 44. He was an employee and also died from a shotgun wound to the head. John Barrier was 27, an employee as well. He was stabbed 9 times and bludgeoned with a shotgun. The killers fled with approximately $1,200 in cash and $1,500 in checks. Fowler's requested last meal was a cheeseburger, a bacon cheeseburger, a grilled chicken sandwich, 2 orders of onion rings, and a cherry limeade. Fowler, now a devout Catholic, spent his final moments praying with his family members who were witnessing the execution. His final words were the recitation of the Hail Mary prayer. Fowler had earlier apologized to the victims' families during his clemency hearing, stating he was equally responsible for what happened. His co-defendant, Billy Ray Fox, was executed 2 days later, on January 25, 2001. Billy Ray Fox, January 25, 2001. His final request was a simple Southern comfort meal: fried chicken, mashed potatoes and gravy, a cherry limeade. Unlike his accomplice who recited a prayer, Fox used his final moments to issue a direct apology to the families of the victims who were watching from behind the glass. "I am sorry for the pain I caused you. I hope you find it in your hearts to forgive me. I'm ready." His execution marked the 6th in Oklahoma that month, a period of unprecedented activity for the state's death chamber. Lloyd Winford Lefevers, January 30, 2001. On June 24, 1985, Lefevers, then 19, and his accomplice, Randall Eugene Cannon, targeted the home of an elderly woman in Oklahoma City during what officials described as a reign of terror. The pair broke into the home of Addie Mae Howley, an 84-year-old woman. They ransacked her house, robbed her, and stole her wedding ring. They forced Howley into the trunk of her own car and drove to a remote area. There, they severely beat her, doused her with gasoline, and set her on fire while she was still alive. Howley was found nude and incoherent near midnight. She had burns over 60% of her body and died in a hospital the following morning. She was the aunt of then Colorado State Senator Ken Schluber. For his final meal, Lefevers requested a substantial spread of fast food and desserts. He wanted a bacon cheeseburger, large orders of onion rings and french fries with ketchup, cherry limeade, pint of chocolate chunk frozen custard, and 1 piece of pecan pie. He maintained a defiant tone during his final moments, addressing his family members as they watched the execution. "I'd just like to thank my loved ones, everyone who loved me and supported me all these years. You all keep smiling because I am." The victim's nephew, the senator, witnessed the execution and later commented that Lefevers had never shown 1 degree of remorse for the vicious killing. Dorsey Leslie Jones Jr., February 1, 2001. At 61 years old, he had been on Oklahoma's death row for more than 20 years, longer than any other inmate in the state at that time. On August 14, 1979, he entered the Wichita Lounge in Lawton, Oklahoma, with 40-year-old Betty Jean Strain. After a bartender noticed a pistol in Jones's boot and asked him to cover it, Jones threatened to shoot her in the head. Moments later, for no apparent reason, he pulled the gun and shot Strain in the abdomen. He then turned his weapon toward the father and son who were playing pool nearby. He shot Stanley Eugene Buck Jr., 19, and then shot Stanley Eugene Buck Sr., 48, twice in the head at point-blank range. He then shot the younger Buck again as he lay on the floor. During his 1980 trial, Jones claimed he was temporarily insane due to an adverse interaction between alcohol and the prescription drug Ativan, but his defense was rejected by the jury. Stanley Eugene Buck Sr. was killed instantly by 2 shots to the head. Stanley Eugene Buck Jr. survived the shooting, but he was left permanently paralyzed on his left side. Betty Jean Strain survived but required surgery to remove her spleen due to her injuries. Jones declined the special last meal request. Instead, he accepted the standard prison menu for that day: hamburger patties, mashed potatoes and gravy, carrots, 2 slices of wheat bread, glazed cake, and a powdered juice drink. Jones did not offer a verbal apology in the execution chamber. His final statement, directed toward his family members who were present, was, "I love y'all take care." Earlier, in a recorded statement for his clemency hearing, he had asked to be spared for the sake of his family, citing his failing health from heart disease and prostate cancer. Robert William Clayton, March 1, 2001. On June 25, 1985, Clayton, then an apartment complex groundskeeper, murdered 19-year-old Rhonda K. Timmons in her Tulsa apartment. Prosecutors stated Clayton encountered Timmons while she was sunbathing and became enraged after she rejected his advances. He beat her, fracturing the front of her skull, and stabbed her 12 to 13 times in the chest, neck, side, and arms. He finally strangled her with her own bathing suit top. Her husband found her body roughly 30 minutes later in front of their infant son's crib. The child was uninjured. Clayton was originally scheduled to be the first execution of 2001 on January 4, but he received a last-minute stay when misplaced evidence, a bloody sock, overalls, and a knife, was found in a locker. However, DNA testing by the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation confirmed that the blood on the sock matched Timmons' DNA, leading to the rescheduling of his execution. Clayton's final meal request included a large seafood spread: shrimp and oysters, fish with tartar sauce, 1 strawberry cheese pie, and a 32-ounce cream soda. Clayton maintained his innocence until the end. He expressed love for his family and asked for divine mercy. Ronald Dunaway Fluke, March 27, 2001. On October 17, 1997, Fluke, a former firefighter and self-employed safety consultant, murdered his family in their Tulsa home. A compulsive gambler, Fluke was facing severe financial ruin, including unpaid taxes and impending car repossession. He later stated his deluded mind believed he was sparing his family the embarrassment of his failure. Ginger Lou Fluke was 44, his wife. While she slept on a couch, he struck her multiple times with a hatchet and then shot her in the head to ensure she was dead. Suzanne Michelle Fluke was 13, his daughter. She was shot once in the head in her upstairs bedroom. Catherine Lee Fluke was 11, his daughter, also shot once in the head in her upstairs bedroom. At approximately 4:30 a.m. on February 1, 1997, Fluke made 2 phone calls. First, he called his parents to tell them what he had done. Immediately after, he called emergency services. On the recorded emergency call, he told the dispatcher, "I just killed my whole family with an axe." He remained on the line and provided his address. When officers arrived at the residence shortly after the call, Fluke was waiting on the front porch. He surrendered without any resistance and directed officers to the bedrooms where the bodies were located. He remained consistent in his desire for the death penalty from the moment of that emergency call until his execution, famously telling the court during his trial, "I am not asking for mercy, I don't deserve it." For his last meal, Fluke officially requested and received 2 cheeseburgers, 2 large fries, 2 large onion rings, and a large chocolate shake. His last words, spoken just before his execution at 9:17 p.m., were, I am sorry for what I've done. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I love you, Mom. I love you, Dad. I'm ready to go home. He directed these words to his parents, who were present as witnesses. Unlike many other death row inmates, Fluke remained consistently remorseful and did not use his final moments to claim innocence or protest the legal system, as he had actively campaigned to be executed for the 1997 murders of his wife and daughters. Marilyn K. Plants, May 1, 2001. She was the second woman executed in Oklahoma's history since statehood. The execution followed her conviction for the 1988 murder of her husband, James Earl Plants. The prosecution established that the murder was orchestrated to collect approximately $300,000 in life insurance benefits. On August 26, 1988, two men, William Clifford Bryson and Clinton McKimble, were hired to ambush Jim Plants at his home. After being attacked inside the house, the victim was transported to a remote location in his pickup truck. The vehicle was then set on fire to make the death appear as an accident. Investigations later determined that the victim died as a result of the fire and the preceding assault. James Plants was 33. He was a supervisor for a local newspaper, and he was described by colleagues and family as a dependable employee and father. For her final meal, Marilyn K. Plants requested a variety of items: a chicken taco salad, a Mexican pizza, two enchiritos, and two chicken soft tacos. She also wanted an order of cinnamon twists and a slice of pecan pie and two cans of Coca-Cola. Witnesses noted that her final statement focused on her fate and her family rather than the crime. Her last words were, "I have overcome the world. Nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from the love of God. If you all want to see me again, you must be born again." Terrence Anthony James, May 22, 2001. He was 41 years old and had spent over 15 years on death row for a murder committed while he was already in custody. The murder occurred on February 6, 1983, in the Muskogee City Federal Jail. James, then 22, was awaiting trial for the theft of arms from a National Guard armory. He became convinced that his co-defendant and fellow inmate Mark Allen Berry was a snitch who had informed on him. While Barry was playing cards with another accomplice, James approached him from behind and strangled him using a wire from a broom. An accomplice, Dennis Earl Brown, held Barry's feet and covered his mouth to prevent him from screaming. After the strangulation, James and his accomplices, Brown and Samuel Raymond Van Wundenberg, hanged Barry's body in a shower stall to make it appear as though he had committed suicide. Barry was 25. At the time of his death, he was awaiting trial on the same federal theft charges as James. He was a father of three small children. James's final meal request was a high-calorie spread: a bacon cheeseburger, a pizza, and a banana mold. On the death row gurney, James offered no apologies or explanations to the victim's family members who were present. He spoke only to acknowledge two female family members who witnessed the execution on his behalf. "I only want to nod to my family." He was pronounced dead at 9:06 p.m. His execution was the 12th in Oklahoma that year during a period of record-setting execution frequency for the state. Vincent Allen Johnson, May 29, 2001. Johnson was convicted of the 1991 murder for hire of Shirley Mooneyham. On February 8, 1991, Johnson went to Mooneyham's rural Pittsburgh County home. They reportedly smoked Mary Jane together before Johnson grabbed the pistol Mooneyham had on the kitchen table, pulled another gun from his pocket, and shot her 6 times in the head and chest while her back was turned. Prosecutors alleged that Mooneyham's estranged common-law husband, Ted Holt, and a friend, John Crane, promised Johnson $100,000 to kill her because she possessed audio tapes that could implicate them in criminal activity. Despite maintaining his innocence at trial, Johnson had earlier confessed to the murder multiple times, including in a conversation secretly taped by an informant where he complained he had not yet been paid the promised $100,000. Ted Holt was later acquitted in a separate trial, and charges against John Crane were dropped. Shirley Mooneyham was 44. She was described by friends as a helpful person who mentored young people in her community. Johnson was a two-time killer. In 1979, he pled guilty to manslaughter for killing Larry Briggs, 22, his roommate, and served part of a 15-year sentence before the Mooneyham murder. His final request meal consisted of fried fish with tartar sauce, hush puppies and French fries, a strawberry malt, and a 7-Up. When asked if he had a final statement while on the gurney, Johnson stared at the ceiling and replied, "No, sir, I don't." He was pronounced dead at 9:07 p.m. Gerald Wayne Harjo, July 17, 2001. On January 16, 1988, Harjo murdered Ruth Marie Porter in her home near Sassacua, Oklahoma. Harjo had been drinking and smoking Mary Jane while bicycling to his brother's house. When a thunderstorm began, he abandoned his bicycle near Porter's house and attempted to steal her van. He entered the home through a back window by stacking cement blocks to reach it. To conceal his identity, he wore a pillowcase with eye holes torn into it over his head. When Porter woke up, Harjo struggled with her, eventually strangling her with his hands and smothering her with a pillow. Investigators noted she suffered a crushed windpipe, scratches, and facial bruising. Additionally, her private area hair had been singed with a lighter. Although he was acquitted of SA at trial, investigators believed an SA had occurred based on evidence found at the scene. Harjo was caught after a police officer spotted Porter's missing van at his brother's home. Muddy tennis shoe prints in the victim's house further linked him to the crime, to which he later confessed on audio tape. Ruth Marie Porter was 64. She was a beloved secretary at the elementary school for 19 years. She was a grandmother, a church treasurer, and a veteran of the Women's Army Corps during World War II. For 28 years, she had been a primary caregiver for her husband, who was paralyzed in a 1960 car accident. Harjo's final meal request included one cheeseburger and two hamburgers, two orders of French fries, a 16-ounce Dr. Pepper, and a large vanilla malt. When Warden Mike Mullen asked if he had any final statement, Harjo replied simply, no. He was pronounced dead at 9:10 p.m. Witnessing the execution were 8 of the victim's relatives, including her daughter, who had discovered her body the morning after the murder. Jack Dale Walker, August 28, 2001. On December 30, 1988, Walker attacked his estranged girlfriend and her family at a mobile home in Bixby, Oklahoma. Walker went to the home with a hunting knife, ostensibly to persuade his girlfriend to return to him by threatening suicide. When she refused to let him take their infant son, he launched a frantic 20-minute attack. During the assault, the female victim managed to call emergency services. Her final words to the dispatcher were, "I need help. He's stabbing me. I'm dead. Please." Walker also stabbed the girlfriend's grandmother, breaking her arm, and chased other family members, including children, out of the trailer. Shelley Dean Ellison was just 17 years old. She was the mother of Walker's 3-month-old son. She was stabbed 32 times, including wounds inflicted with an ice pick. Donald Gary Epperson was 30. He was Ellison's uncle, who was stabbed 11 times while trying to defend her. Walker requested a large fast food meal, 3 cheeseburgers with extra salt, 3 sliced tomatoes, French fries, and a strawberry mold. Before the lethal drugs were administered, Walker smiled and nodded at his family and legal team. His final statement was, "I'd just like to tell my family and friends goodbye. I love you and I hope to see you soon. Take care." His 13-year-old son, Joshua, who had been an infant at the time of the murders, wrote a letter to the parole board in support of the execution, stating that his father should pay for what he did. Alvy James Hale Jr., October 18, 2001. His execution was for the 1983 kidnapping and murder of William Jeffrey Perry. On October 10, 1983, Hale kidnapped 24-year-old Perry from his home in Tecumseh, Oklahoma. Hale made a series of telephone calls to Perry's parents, who were officers at the bank where Perry worked as a teller, demanding $350,000 ransom. FBI agents observed the ransom exchange at a rural location. After Hale picked up the money, he led agents on a high-speed chase into Oklahoma City that ended when his truck hit a drainage ditch and collided with an agent's vehicle. Perry's bullet-ridden body was discovered on October 12, 1983, in a storage bin at a home owned by Hale's father. He had been shot 5 times. Hale maintained throughout his appeals that Perry had staged his own kidnapping to pay off drug and gambling debts, and that others were responsible for the actual killing. Perry was a cashier and teller at the Farmers and Merchants Bank of Tecumseh. He was the son of prominent local bankers. Hale's final meal consisted of a bacon double cheeseburger, onion rings and French fries, a milkshake, and a hot fudge sundae. In his last words, Hale addressed his family, friends, and the victim's sister, Ronnie Sharp, with whom he had reconciled during his time on death row. His final statement was, "I want to say goodbye to my family and friends. I want to thank them for being there for me. Watch what you see here and remember it and go tell somebody." He was pronounced dead at 9:24 p.m. Lois Nadine Smith, December 4, 2001. On July 4, 1982, Smith murdered 21-year-old Cindy Bailey. Nicknamed Mean Nadine since high school, she was 61 years old at the time of her death, and she was the last woman then on Oklahoma's death row. Smith believed rumors that Bailey, her son's ex-girlfriend, had arranged to have her son, James Greg Smith, killed or intended to inform police about his drug dealing. Smith, her son, and another woman picked Bailey up from a motel. While driving, Smith confronted Bailey, then choked her and stabbed her in the throat with a knife. After reaching a house in Gans, Oklahoma, Smith forced Bailey into a recliner and taunted her before shooting her multiple times. Witnesses testified that Smith laughed and jumped on Bailey's neck while her son reloaded the pistol. An autopsy revealed Bailey had been shot 9 times in the chest, head, and back and stabbed in the throat. Cindy Bailey was 21. She was the mother of a 4-year-old daughter at the time of her death. Her daughter later wrote to the parole board that Smith's actions had left a permanent hole in her heart. Smith's requested final meal consisted of barbecued ribs, onion rings, strawberry banana cake, and a cherry limeade. Before her execution, Smith asked for forgiveness and quoted scripture. "To the families, I want to say I'm sorry for the pain and loss I've caused you. I ask that you forgive me. You must forgive to be forgiven. To live is Christ. To die is gain. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Thank you, Jesus." Smith's son Greg was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison for his role in the slaying. Sahib Latif al-Mosawi, December 6, 2001. An Iraqi national, he was the 18th and final person executed in Oklahoma that year, setting a state record for the most executions in a single calendar year. On November 28, 1992, al-Mosawi murdered his wife and her uncle during a domestic dispute in Oklahoma City. He had a history of marital problems with his wife, Inam al-Nashi. Tensions escalated shortly after the birth of their son when they argued over the baby's name. Al-Mosawi threatened her life, leading her to seek and receive a permanent victim protection order. 2 weeks later, al-Mosawi went to the apartment of his wife's uncle where she was staying. He became enraged when he learned his wife intended to attend a dinner party with friends. When the uncle, Mohammed al-Nashi, tried to force him to leave, al-Mosawi pulled out a butcher knife. He stabbed Mohammed to death in the apartment. He then chased his wife outside and fatally stabbed her. He also attacked her 19-year-old sister, Fatima, stabbing her 3 times. She luckily survived her injuries. In observance of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, al-Mosawi fasted from dawn until dusk on the day of his execution. For his requested final meal, he chose chicken, olives and grapes, and a pomegranate. Al-Mosawi did not make a final verbal statement or apology in the execution chamber. He spent his final hours in prayer and fasting. Witnesses noted that no members of the victim's family attended the execution. John Joseph Romano, January 29, 2002. Romano was sentenced to death for the 1985 murder of Roger Joel Sarfati. He was also convicted and sentenced to death for a separate 1986 murder. The Sarfati murder occurred on October 12, 1985. Romano and his accomplice, David Wayne Woodruff, targeted Sarfati, a 52-year-old jewelry dealer who operated out of his Oklahoma City apartment. Sarfati was beaten, strangled, and stabbed 5 times in the heart. The pair robbed him of jewelry and containers filled with quarters that Sarfati kept for poker games. His daughter, Tuila Alvarez, stated at the time of the execution that her father was robbed of the opportunity to know his grandchildren. The Thompson murder occurred on July 19, 1986. Less than a year later, Romano and Woodruff murdered Lloyd Thompson, a 63-year-old friend and gambling acquaintance. Thompson was beaten and stabbed 22 times in his apartment. Romano was found with $1,000 shortly after the robbery, despite having no money earlier that day. For his last meal, he requested spaghetti with meatballs, ravioli and sausage, strawberry and cherry cheesecake. Before the execution, Romano lifted his head to smile at his witnesses and offered an apology for his past actions. For whoever I've wronged, I'd like for them to forgive me. I'd like to tell my family and friends I love you. Thank you for your love and support. His co-defendant, David Wayne Woodruff, was executed 2 days later. David Wayne Woodruff, January 31, 2002. Woodruff was also convicted of solicitation to commit murder for attempting to hire an informant to kill everyone in an Edmond coin shop during a planned robbery. His requested final meal consisted of 2 cheeseburgers, fried potatoes, and a lemon-lime slushie. Woodruff showed no remorse in his final moments. His final statement was blunt and defiant. "We're not here for a social event. We're here for a killing. Name's David Wayne Woodruff. Let's get this show on the road." Randall Eugene Cannon, July 23, 2002. Cannon was sentenced to death for the first-degree murder of Addie Mae Howley, an 84-year-old woman. The crime, described by prosecutors as one of the meanest they had ever seen, occurred on June 24, 1985. Cannon and his accomplice, Lloyd Winford Lefevers, executed in 2001, broke into Howley's Oklahoma City home after she returned from church. They beat her severely, stuffed her into the trunk of her own car, and drove her to a vacant lot. They doused her with gasoline and set her on fire. Firefighters later found her nude, incoherent, and suffering from burns over 65% of her body. She died early the next morning at the hospital. At the time of his execution, Cannon had also pleaded no contest to charges involving the June 25, 1985 beatings of an 81-year-old woman and her granddaughter. Cannon's final meal request included a 21-piece shrimp dinner, a 5-piece fish dinner, a Dr. Pepper, and a banana split. When asked if he had any final statement, he simply replied no. He then looked at the ceiling, took a deep breath, and remained silent until he was pronounced dead at 6:05 p.m. Family members of the victim, including her nephew, former Colorado State Senator Ken Schluber, witnessed the execution and expressed anger that neither Cannon nor his co-defendant ever showed remorse for their actions. Earl Alexander Frederick Sr., July 30, 2002. Frederick was convicted for the November 11, 1989 murder of Bradford Lee Beck, a 41-year-old partially paralyzed Vietnam War veteran. Beck had befriended Frederick just 5 days prior, believing him to be a fellow veteran, and allowed him to stay at his home. Frederick brutally beat Beck to death, stole his clothes and pickup truck, and dumped his partially decomposed body in a field. Frederick was also a primary suspect in the Texas murder of Shirley Fox, a 77-year-old disabled man. Fox was beaten and shot in the face with a shotgun during a robbery just days after Beck's murder. Texas officials chose not to prosecute as Oklahoma was already seeking the death penalty. Frederick claimed to have a multiple personality disorder and amnesia, stating that an alternate personality named Jeff committed the killing. Prosecutors argued he was faking the condition. Though his first 1992 conviction was overturned due to a lack of mental health expert testimony, he was convicted and sentenced to death again in 1998. He eventually waived his remaining appeals to expedite the execution. For his last meal, he requested fried chicken, biscuits, and chocolate pie. Moments before the lethal injection, Frederick expressed deep remorse. His final statement included, "Mere words cannot begin to express the sorrow I feel over my actions. I am guilty of the crime, let there be no doubt of that." Jerry Lynn McCracken, December 10, 2002. He was 35 years old at the time of his death. McCracken was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder for a 1990 robbery homicide at the New Ferndale Lounge in Tulsa, where he killed 4 people. The victims were bartenders Carol Ann McDaniels and Steve Allen Smith and customers Tyrell Lee Boyd and Timothy Edward Sheets. He was on parole for a previous stabbing at the time and admitted to being the sole shooter. For his last meal, he had fried chicken, barbecue sauce, cheese, cherry pie, and Sprite. In his last words, he offered apologies to the families of the victims. J. Wesley Neal, December 12, 2002. Neal was executed for his role in the 1984 Geronimo Bank murders, one of the deadliest in Oklahoma history. On December 14, 1984, Neal and Robert Grady Johnson targeted the First Bank of Chattanooga. Neil entered the bank and fatally stabbed three female employees, Kay Bruno, 42, Jerry Bowles, 19, and the pregnant Joyce Mullinex, 25. Then he shot customer Ralph Zeller, 33. Three other customers survived being shot. Reports indicate Neil also attempted to shoot a 14-month-old child. According to reports, for his last meal, he requested a double cheeseburger, fries, peach or cherry cobbler with vanilla ice cream, and cran grape juice. Prior to his execution, an emotional Neil apologized to the victims' families, stating in part, "I'm sorry for the horrible, horrible thing I did. I hope you find some comfort in that." He also maintained that his accomplice, Robert Johnson, was not in the bank. Before losing consciousness, he asked, "Are they starting?" Ernest Marvin Carter Jr., December 17, 2002. Carter was convicted of the first-degree murder of Eugene Manowski, a 35-year-old security guard and father of six. On January 28, 1990, Carter broke into the Oklahoma auto auction lot from which he had recently been fired for sleeping on the job. He killed Manowski by shooting him once in the head in the guard shack to steal a tow truck, valued at approximately $500. Charles Summers was also convicted for his role in the robbery, but he received a life sentence. Carter maintained his innocence throughout his 12 years on death row, claiming he only helped paint the stolen truck afterward. For his final meal, he requested a deep dish supreme pizza, a 7-Up, and a slice of cherry cheesecake. As he was being executed, Carter smiled at his family and said, "I'll be with y'all on the other side. I'm going now. God bless you, sweetheart." His death was particularly controversial because the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board had unanimously recommended clemency due to a lack of direct evidence, but the governor denied the request, stating he was morally certain of Carter's guilt. Daniel Juan Revilla, January 16, 2003. He was convicted of the first-degree murder of Mark Gomez, the 13-month-old son of his teenage girlfriend. On January 26, 1987, in Altus, Oklahoma, Revilla was left alone with the child. He later brought the baby to the hospital, claiming the child had stopped breathing and that he had accidentally injured him while trying to perform CPR. An autopsy revealed the infant had suffered a severed liver, a swollen and bleeding brain, and numerous bruises, blisters, and burns. Medical experts testified these injuries were inconsistent with an accident. Witnesses, including the child's mother, testified that Revilla hated the boy because he was not his biological son. Evidence showed a month-long pattern of torture, including hanging the baby by his ankles with duct tape, dunking him in cold water, and stuffing him in a kitchen drawer. In October 1987, shortly after his conviction, Revilla escaped from the Jackson County Jail and fled to Mexico with a girlfriend. He was recaptured 2 months later. His last meal request included 3 large hamburgers, 2 orders of French fries, an order of shrimp, 4 mini pecan pies, and a large cherry Coke. When asked if he had a final statement, he simply shook his head no. He remained silent, looking towards the ceiling as the procedure began, and he was pronounced dead at 6:12 p.m. The victim's father, Juan Gomez, witnessed the execution and stated that while he felt justice was served for his son, he also forgave Revilla, noting he was young, 18, at the time of the crime. Bobby Joe Fields, February 13, 2003. Fields was convicted of the first-degree murder of Louise Shem, a 77-year-old woman. On March 2, 1993, after a night of drinking and using cocaine, Fields broke into Shem's Oklahoma City home with the intent to steal her TV to fund his drug habit. Shem returned home and confronted him with a .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol. A struggle ensued that moved from the living room to the front sidewalk. Fields wrestled the gun away and shot Shem once in the back of the neck at close range. She attempted to flee, but she didn't have a chance. Fields entered a blind guilty plea in 1994, expecting life without parole, but the judge sentenced him to death instead. His final meal, which was limited to the state's $15 maximum, consisted of fried catfish served with hot sauce. Before his execution, Fields spoke to his sister and cousin who were present. His final statement included, "Stay strong, you all keep fighting. Cousin, if you can, try to look after my boy. Baby girl, stay strong and hold my family together. I love you all, let's get this out of the way." Field's execution was notable because the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board had recommended clemency by a 3-to-1 vote. Walonzo Dion Robinson, March 18, 2003. Robinson, an 18-year-old at the time of the crime, was a member of a violent Los Angeles street gang known as the Van Ness Gangster Bloods. On May 19, 1989, in Oklahoma City, Robinson murdered Dennis Eugene Hill, a 26-year-old rival drug dealer. The shooting stemmed from an argument over drug sales and territory. Witnesses testified that Robinson shot Hill in the back as Hill tried to run away across a street. Robinson then walked up to the wounded man as he lay on the ground pleading for an ambulance and shot him twice more. He then fled to California, but he was arrested by Los Angeles police 4 months later. For his final meal, Robinson requested a cucumber salad with lettuce and tomatoes, a beef sausage pizza, a chocolate fudge sundae with nuts, and a small jar of dill pickle halves. Robinson used his final statement to maintain his innocence, blaming the state of Oklahoma and claiming the action was against his religious beliefs. John Michael Hooker, March 25, 2003. Hooker was convicted of the first-degree murders of his common-law wife and her mother on March 27, 1988 in Oklahoma City. The victims were Sylvia Stokes, 28, and Drusilla Morgan, 53. After a history of domestic violence, Stokes moved out to live with her mother. When they returned to their shared apartment for belongings, Hooker attacked both women with an 8-inch butcher knife. At 17, Hooker was convicted of manslaughter for a 1971 shooting. His last meal included fried chicken, a loaded potato, cheeseburgers, cheesecake, and soda. Prior to his execution, he addressed his family and friends with a statement expressing that he was at peace. To all my family and friends, I'm all hooked up. I can't even move. I'm at peace. You all stay up, I'm out. He reportedly smiled at witnesses during his final moments. Scott Allen Hain, April 3, 2003. He was 32 years old at the time of his death. His execution was historically significant as he was the last person in the U.S. executed for a crime committed as a minor. He was 17 at the time of the murders. The Supreme Court outlawed the practice in 2005. The murders occurred on October 6, 1987 in Tulsa, ending what authorities described as a 4-month crime spree. The victims were Michael William Houghton, 27, and Laura Lee Sanders, 22, co-workers who were talking in a car outside a bar. Hain and his accomplice, Robert Wayne Lambert, carjacked the victims at knife point, robbed them of $565, and forced them into the trunk of Sanders' car. They drove the car to a secluded area, cut the fuel line, and set the vehicle on fire. Witnesses and investigators noted the victims were heard screaming and banging on the trunk as they were burned alive. The killers reportedly returned to the scene a short time later to ensure the fire was burning well. Hain's final meal request included 3 cheeseburgers, 3 orders of onion rings, ice cream, and a slush drink. When asked if he had a final statement, Hain declined to make one. He remained silent until he was pronounced dead at 8:39 p.m. The execution took place after a series of legal delays, including a stay from an appeals court that was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court just 2 hours before his death. Don Wilson Hawkins Jr., April 8, 2003. Hawkins was sentenced to death for the 1985 kidnapping and murder of Linda Ann Thompson, a 29-year-old mother of 2. The murder took place on August 20, 1985. Hawkins and his cousin, Dale Shelton, kidnapped Thompson and her 2 young daughters, aged 4 years and 18 months, from a mall parking lot in Oklahoma City. They took her to a house where she was separated from her children, chained in a barn, and repeatedly essayed. After determining they could not get ransom money, Hawkins drove Thompson to Sportsman's Lake. He hogtied her and held her underwater until she drowned. He later confessed he killed her so she could not identify him. Her daughters were released unharmed in their babysitter's neighborhood. While on death row, Hawkins was also linked to the robbery and hanging death of David Coupez in Denver, Colorado, occurring just weeks before Thompson's murder. Hawkins requested a stuffed crust combo pizza with extra cheese and a Dr. Pepper for his final meal. Before his execution, Hawkins addressed witnesses, expressing a sense of peace and claiming to be forgiven. Reports indicate he mentioned the state was seeking vengeance rather than justice. Larry Kenneth Jackson, April 17, 2003. Jackson was convicted of the first-degree murder of his girlfriend, Wendy Cade, a 29-year-old hairdresser and mother. On September 6, 1994, Jackson was serving a 30-year sentence for a previous murder, the 1985 shooting of his common-law wife, Freda Washington, and he was assigned to a prison work crew at the state capitol complex. He walked away from his detail and met Cade, who picked him up in her Jeep. After drinking and using drugs, the two went to a Motel 6 in Oklahoma City. Prosecutors stated that Cade intended to end their relationship and would not help Jackson's efforts to win parole. Jackson attacked her with a state-issued box cutter he had been using for his work detail, slashing her throat and stabbing her more than 30 times. Cade's body was found the following day by her mother and fiancé. Jackson was apprehended soon after at a nearby apartment in possession of Cade's jewelry, watch, and car keys. For his last meal, he requested 2 double cheeseburgers, 2 orders of French fries, and a large vanilla milkshake. Before the procedure began, Jackson addressed his family and the family of the victim. His final words were, "To the Pearson family, I hope you find some peace in your heart. To my family, I love you all. Stay strong. I'm ready." Robert Wesley Knighton, May 27, 2003. Knighton's execution was for the first-degree murders of an elderly couple, Richard Denny, 62, and his wife, Virginia Denny, 64, on January 8, 1990. Knighton was the leader of a 3-day multi-state crime spree involving 2 accomplices, Lawrence Britton, 17, and Ruth Renee Williams, 20. After their van ran out of gas, they approached the Denny's rural farmhouse. When Richard Denny came out to offer help and directions, Knighton forced him back into the house at gunpoint and shot both Richard and Virginia once in the chest. The trio then stole the couple's truck and $61. During the same spree, Knighton shot and killed 2 other men in Missouri, Frank Merrifield and his stepson, Roy Donahue. Additionally, Knighton had a prior criminal history, having served 17 years in a Missouri prison for a manslaughter conviction in the 1970s. His final meal consisted of a large pepperoni pizza, a strawberry milkshake, a large order of onion rings, and a banana cream pie. His final statement was brief and spoken in an almost inaudible voice. He thanked his attorneys and apologized for his actions. He then spoke directly to Sue Norton, Richard Denny's adopted daughter, who had forgiven him and even testified on his behalf at his clemency hearing. His final words were, "I'm sorry for all I've done. I'll see you again someday. God bless you." As he spoke to her, Sue Norton responded by giving him a thumbs up as the execution process began. Kenneth Chad Charm, June 5, 2003. Charm was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of his former girlfriend and her mother on April 20, 1993. Driven by a domestic dispute, Charm went to the victim's home where he attacked Brandy Renee Weaver, 20, and Sandra Thompson, 45. He beat both women and then shot each of them in the head with a .22 caliber rifle. To cover his tracks, he piled clothing and linens on top of their bodies and set them on fire. Prosecutors established that Charm was angry because Brandy had recently broken up with him and had filed for a protective order against him just days before the murders. For his last meal, he requested 2 double meat cheeseburgers, 2 large orders of French fries, and a large strawberry milkshake. Before the execution procedure began, Charm looked toward the witness room where the victim's family members were seated. He offered a direct apology for the pain he had caused. His last words were, "I want to apologize to the Thompson family for the grief I have caused them. I want to thank my family and friends for their support. I'm ready. I'm going home." Following this statement, he remained silent as the drugs were administered, and he was pronounced dead at 6:09 p.m. Louis Eugene Gilbert, July 1, 2003. His death sentence in Oklahoma was specifically for the murder of Roxanne Roxy Lynn Ruddle, a 37-year-old off-duty security guard. On September 3, 1994, Gilbert and his 16-year-old accomplice, Eric Alvin Elliott, encountered Ruddle while she was fishing alone at Lake Stanley Draper in Oklahoma City. They kidnapped her, took her to a wooded area, and tied her hands with a phone cord. Despite Ruddle begging for her life and offering them her truck keys, Gilbert shot her multiple times in the head and back of the neck to eliminate her as a witness. They stole her pickup truck and approximately $2 or $3. This was the final act in a week-long spree that included other victims. Ruth Lucille Loader, 79. She was kidnapped from her home in Ohio on August 29, 1994. Gilbert confessed to shooting her in the head and leaving her body in a field. Her remains were never found. William Forrest Brewer, 86, and Flossie Mae Brewer, 76. They were an elderly couple in Missouri whom the pair murdered on August 30, 1994. After their first stolen car got stuck in the mud, they gained entry to the Brewers' farmhouse by asking to use the phone. They tied the couple up, took them to the basement, and shot both in the head before stealing their car and valuables. For his last meal, Gilbert requested half a gallon of vanilla ice cream, a box of assorted ice cream cones, and a box of Whoppers. Before the procedure began, he addressed his spiritual beliefs and thanked God. His final words were, "This is weird, but I'm actually looking forward to seeing God. I'm coming home. Thank you, God." His accomplice, Eric Elliott, was sentenced to life in prison without parole because he was a minor at the time of the crimes. Robert Don Duckett, July 8, 2003. Duckett was convicted of the first-degree murder of John Howard, a 53-year-old convenience store manager. On October 18, 1988, Howard was found dead in his Oklahoma City apartment. Duckett, a prison escapee at the time, had been befriended by Howard, who picked him up while hitchhiking and offered him a job and a place to stay. Duckett used a wooden ashtray stand and a fireplace poker to beat Howard to death. Howard's hands and feet were bound with wire hangers, and he was gagged with a sock and bandana. An autopsy revealed a broken ankle, numerous skull fractures, and a ruptured left eye. Prosecutors argued Duckett killed Howard after Howard asked him to move out. Duckett's defense claimed Howard had made a pass at him, triggering post-traumatic stress from a previous prison essay. Duckett stole Howard's car and cash from the convenience store. He was arrested 2 weeks later in Arizona driving the stolen vehicle with switched license plates. His last meal consisted of a small pizza, a chili cheese coney, and a half-gallon of cookie dough ice cream. He also requested and got a vanilla Coke. Moments before the execution, Duckett addressed his parents, who were present as witnesses. His final statement was, "I just want to apologize and hope my family forgives me. I love them very much and I hope they never forget that. Let's go." Brian Anthony Tolles, July 22, 2003. Tolles was convicted for the July 16, 1993 murders of a father and son in Lawton, Oklahoma during a botched robbery. The victims were Juan Franceschi, 39, an Army veteran and Sergeant First Class, and Lonnie Franceschi, 15, Juan's teenage son. Tolles and two accomplices, David Flowers and Casey Young, decided to steal a car because they were tired of walking home from a bar. They targeted a red Mustang in the Franceschi driveway, but did not know how to hotwire it, so they forced their way into the home to get the keys. During a struggle in the hallway, Tolles shot Juan Franceschi in the chest. As Tolles was leaving the house, he saw Lonnie kneeling on the floor with his hands behind his back. Fearing the boy could identify him, Tolles shot him in the back of the head at close range. Juan died at the scene, while Lonnie was later declared brain dead and removed from life support. David Flowers, who was 16 at the time, received a life sentence, while the third suspect was tried as a juvenile. Tolles' last meal included 4 fried chicken breasts, mashed potatoes and gravy, 2-foot-long chili cheese dogs, chili cheese fries, 3 pecan pies, and a 2-liter cream soda. As he lay strapped to the gurney, he apologized to the victim's family, stating, "I'd like to apologize to the victim's family and ask them for their forgiveness. I love all y'all. Thanks for coming. Take care of my mother. I'll see y'all later. We're all right. I fixing to pass out, I think." Jackie Lee Willingham, July 24, 2003. Willingham was convicted of the first-degree murder and robbery of Jane Ellen Van Way, a 62-year-old arts leader in Lawton, Oklahoma. On December 20, 1994, Willingham was working as a traveling perfume salesman when he visited Van Way's office. When she repeatedly refused to buy anything and asked him to leave, a verbal altercation ensued. Willingham followed Van Way into a nearby restroom, pulled her from a stall, and brutally beat and kicked her. He slammed her head into the wall and kicked her in the face with his boots. Van Way died from asphyxiation as her lungs filled with her own blood while she was lying unconscious on the floor. Before fleeing, Willingham stole 2 credit cards from Van Way's purse to make the scene look like a robbery. He was caught after using the stolen cards and being seen at a local restaurant with a fresh scratch on his neck. For his last meal, he had fettuccine alfredo, a small deep dish pepperoni pizza, breadsticks, and 2 peppermint patties. Prior to his execution, he apologized to the victim's family and spoke to his own family members. His final words were, "I hope that my execution brings you some closure and you can someday forgive me. I love you. Okay, I'm ready." Harold Lloyd McElmurray, July 29, 2003. He was convicted of the August 2, 1999 murders of an elderly couple who had previously hired him for yard work and odd jobs. The victims were Robert Pendley, 80, a World War II veteran and wheelchair-bound paraplegic, and his wife, Rosa Vivian Pendley, 75. After walking 2 days to reach the victim's home, McElmurray and his wife, Vicky, spent hours discussing whether to rob or kill the couple while using methamphetamine. Once inside the garage, McElmurray stabbed Robert Pendley multiple times with a pair of scissors and beat him with a garden hoe and an iron pipe. When Vivian Pendley tried to flee, McElmurray had his wife catch and hold her while he beat and stabbed her to death. The couple stole $70, 2 pistols, and the Pendley's car to flee to Mexico. McElmurray later stated he committed the crime because he believed he was about to be arrested for a probation violation and needed money to start a new life. Vicky McElmurray was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for her role in the slayings. For his last meal, McElmurray had a medium Canadian bacon pizza, a pint of chicken livers, cottage cheese, and 1 raw onion. Moments before his execution, McElmurray offered an apology to the victim's family members. His final words were, "I'd like to say I'm sorry to the Pendleys. I hope they can forgive me." The couple's grandson, Robert Pendley Jr., witnessed the execution and stated afterward that he believed the apology was sincere and had chosen to forgive McElmurray. Tyrone Peter Darks, January 13, 2004. Darks was sentenced to death for the first-degree murder of his 26-year-old ex-wife Sherry Dean Goodlow on August 7, 1994. Following a history of domestic violence, Darks forced Goodlow off the road, snatched their 2-year-old son, and later shot her 6 times at close range. 2 days prior to the murder, Darks threatened to kill her. While on death row, he was also indicted for attempting to defraud the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund by claiming his wife died in the attacks. Darks requested a high-calorie meal, including 6 extra crispy chicken breasts with hot sauce, 6 rolls, jelly beans, red licorice, 6 glazed lemon donuts, and 6 cream sodas. Addressing his family, Darks said, "Y'all take care of yourselves. Do what you can for Scott. I'll see y'all later. This is it. It's over. Praise the Lord. Praise God. Whoa." He did not address the victim's family. Norman Richard Cleary, February 17, 2004. Cleary was convicted of first-degree murder and first-degree burglary for a crime committed on December 6, 1991. The victim was Wanda Nefas, a 44-year-old housekeeper. Cleary and an accomplice, Kenneth Chandler, targeted an upscale home in Tulsa's Maple Ridge neighborhood for a burglary. After checking other houses, they reached the home where Nefas was working. When she answered the door, a handgun slipped from Chandler's coat. Fearing they had been compromised, the men forced their way in. Cleary led Nefas to the basement at gunpoint and shot her 5 times in the face, head, and neck. Despite the violence, the only items reported stolen were Nefas' purse and a souvenir walking cane from the Smithsonian Institution. Cleary was on parole at the time of the murder. He had extensive previous convictions, including first-degree burglary and a violent assault on an 87-year-old woman in her home. According to reports, Cleary's final meal consisted of 2-foot-long chili cheese hot dogs, 6 pieces of extra crispy chicken, a large chocolate malt, and a large vanilla malt. Before his execution, Cleary addressed the family of his victim and his own family, expressing remorse and apologizing for the pain he caused, while also thanking his family for their love. His family responded with expressions of love as the procedure took place. David J. Brown, March 9, 2004. Brown was sentenced to death for the first-degree murder of his former father-in-law, Eldon Lee McGuire, a 47-year-old retired fire captain. On February 19, 1988, Brown went to McGuire's home in Norge, Oklahoma. He shot McGuire 8 times, including twice in the head at close range and once in the back of the head. Brown had a volatile history with the McGuire family. He had previously been charged with kidnapping and pointing a weapon at McGuire's daughter, Brown's ex-wife, and others at a hair salon. Brown blamed McGuire for these legal troubles and had allegedly made threats to kill multiple members of the family. Brown claimed he acted in self-defense, testifying that McGuire had attacked him and fired first. Prosecutors successfully disputed this, noting that McGuire was shot multiple times from behind and at close range. For his last meal, Brown had barbecue beef with hot sauce and onion, 2 large orders of French fries, and a vanilla malt. Brown used his final statement to maintain his innocence and issue a harsh critique of the legal system. Hang Tan Le, March 23, 2004. He was a Vietnamese refugee whose execution drew international attention and multiple stays of execution from Governor Brad Henry. Le was convicted of the November 12, 1992 murder of Hay Hong Nguyen, 34, a fellow Vietnamese refugee and friend whom Le had met in a Thai refugee camp years prior. While staying as a guest at the Nguyen's Oklahoma City home, Le attacked Hay Nguyen with an 18-inch metal weightlifting bar, hitting him in the head. When Nguyen's wife Tui entered the room, Le went to the kitchen and returned with a butcher knife and a meat cleaver. Le stabbed Hay Nguyen multiple times and hacked at his neck and back with the cleaver. During the attack, he also assaulted Tui, wounding her head and hands as she begged him to stop. After the killing, Les stole the victim's car and used the stolen key to access their bank safety deposit box, where he took approximately $36,000 in cash and a diamond ring. He was apprehended at the airport the following day while attempting to flee to Ohio. Le claimed at trial that Nguyen owed him $10,000 from a failed business venture and refused to pay it back. Prosecutors argued the motive was purely robbery. For his final meal, he requested Hunan beef, Hunan special fried rice, dragon soup, and 2 egg rolls. From the execution gurney, Les spoke at length, offering an apology to both families and urging people to choose love over hatred. His last words were, "Thank you all for being here today. I would like to apologize to both families. I hope my death will help replace the hatred for each other. Instead of hatred, love each other. Life is short. I wish I could take back the things I have done. To my parents, tell them I love them very much." Robert Leroy Bryan, June 8, 2004. Bryan was convicted and sentenced to death for the first-degree murder of his 69-year-old aunt, Mildred Annabelle Bryan. On September 11, 1993, Annabelle Bryan disappeared from her home near Sweetwater, Oklahoma. Her body was found 6 days later in a field adjoining his parents' property near Elk City. She had been shot once in the forehead. Prosecutors argued the motive was financial. Shortly before the murder, Bryan wrote fraudulent promissory notes and filed out checks to withdraw money from her account. He forged her signature on a note for $1,800 and was caught drawing money from her account even after her death. Investigators found a .22 caliber shell under the seat of Bryan's rental car and hair and fibers in the trunk that were consistent with the victim. His defense claimed he suffered from organic brain disease and schizophrenia, and that his delusions led him to believe his aunt owed him millions for fictional inventions. Despite this, he was found competent to stand trial and be executed. His last meal was 10 pieces of fried chicken, barbecue beans, coleslaw, potatoes and gravy, 2 biscuits, and 2 liters of Dr. Pepper. Before his execution, Bryan kept his head turned away from the witnesses. His final words were, "I have been on death row for some time. I've made peace with my maker. I'll be leaving here shortly. I hope I'll see you on the other side. Until then, so long." Wendell Ray Workman, August 26, 2004. Workman was convicted of the first-degree child abuse and murder of 2-year-old Amanda Holman, the daughter of his live-in girlfriend. On January 10, 1987, Workman brought Amanda to an Oklahoma City hospital where she was pronounced dead on arrival. An autopsy revealed the toddler died from blunt force trauma to the head, with injuries consistent with being hit or slammed against a wall rather than the accidental falls from a bed or bathtub claimed by workmen. She also had extensive bruising across her body, and testimony suggested a pattern of prior abuse, with the child in Workman's sole care when the fatal injuries occurred. Workman's last meal consisted of a barbecue platter and unsweetened tea. Before his execution, he thanked his attorneys. He was pronounced dead at 6:08 p.m. Jimmy Ray Slaughter, March 15, 2005. He was the first person executed in Oklahoma that year and maintained his innocence until his death. Slaughter was convicted of the July 2, 1991 murders of his former girlfriend, Melody Sue Wertz, 29, and their 11-month-old daughter, Jessica Ray Wertz. Prosecutors stated that Slaughter, a married nurse, killed them in a fit of rage after Melody filed a paternity suit for child support. Melody was shot, stabbed, and mutilated, with symbols carved into her abdomen. Jessica was shot twice in the head. Slaughter tried to stage the scene as a lust murder by a stranger, planting false evidence, and despite his defense claiming he was elsewhere and trying to use brain fingerprinting technology, he was convicted. According to reports, his last meal included fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie, ice cream, and a drink. Looking toward his daughters and his attorney, his last words were, "I'm an innocent man. I didn't kill Melody, and I didn't kill Jessica. This is a day of celebration. I'm going home to be with my Lord. I love you, girls. To the victim's family, I hope you find the peace you are looking for because you aren't going to find it here. I'm ready." George James Miller Jr., May 12, 2005. He was 37 years old at the time of his death. Miller was convicted of the first-degree murder of Kent Dodd, a 25-year-old night auditor at the Central Plaza Hotel in Oklahoma City. The crime occurred during a robbery in the early morning hours of September 17, 1994. The nature of the crime was particularly brutal, leading the jury to find it especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Dodd was stabbed repeatedly and beaten with head shears and a paint can. Miller poured muriatic acid on Dodd's face and down his throat while he was still alive. Dodd was found alive hours later by a coworker who heard animal moans. Although unable to speak clearly due to acid burns, he managed to describe his attacker as a black man in gray pants before dying at the hospital later that day from blunt force trauma. Miller, a former maintenance worker at the hotel, was known to Dodd by the alias J. Elkins. Some key evidence included bloody writing. Prosecutors argued that Dodd used his own blood to trace the name J on a door as he lay dying, a theory the defense heavily disputed. There was also a microscopic drop of blood consistent with Dodd's that was found on Miller's sandal, and his wife testified he was not home during the murder and later gave her $120, roughly the amount missing from the hotel till. Miller requested a hearty meal consisting of sliced beef brisket, pork spare ribs, and half a chicken. He also asked for potato salad, baked beans, a piece of pecan pie, a piece of cheesecake, and a strawberry milkshake. While strapped to the gurney, Miller nodded to his mother and family members and simply said, "I love you." Michael Lanier Pennington, July 19, 2005. Pennington was executed by lethal injection for the 1991 murder of a convenience store clerk. At the time of his execution, he had changed his name to Sharif Imani Salahdin after converting to Islam in prison. On October 21, 1991, Pennington, then a 24-year-old soldier stationed at Fort Sill, robbed a 7-Eleven in Lawton, Oklahoma. During the botched robbery, he shot Bradley Thomas Grooms, a 20-year-old store clerk, in the back with a sawed-off shotgun. After shooting Grooms, Pennington fired several more rounds at the cash register, but it failed to open. He fled empty-handed, and he was arrested the following day at his wife's home in Akron, Ohio. At trial, he initially blamed the murder on a mysterious gang member named T. On appeal, he argued that anabolic steroids used for bodybuilding had caused steroid rage, altering his personality and turning him into a killer. Pennington requested a small vegetarian pizza, a large garden salad with Italian dressing, a hot fudge sundae, a bag of Oreo cookies, and a pint of milk. When asked for a final statement, he replied, "No statement." However, as he was being executed, he looked toward his family members and mouthed the words, "I love you." Kenneth Eugene Tarantine, August 11, 2005. He was 52 years old at the time of his death. Tarantine was executed for a murderous shooting spree that occurred on June 4, 1994 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Driven by a jealous rage and suspicions of infidelity, he killed 4 people. Anita Louise Richardson was 39. She was Tarantine's estranged girlfriend, whom he suspected was having affairs. Avon Stevenson, 48, Tarantine's sister. He believed she was helping Richardson deceive him. Tina Pennington, 22, Richardson's daughter, who was born blind and mentally disabled. Martise Richardson was 13, Richardson's young son. Tarantine first shot his sister in the head after she reportedly laughed at his accusations. He then drove to Richardson's home and killed her and her 2 children. Afterward, he called emergency services to confess and waited for the police to arrive. While he was originally sentenced to death for 3 of the murders, a federal appeals court later overturned the death sentences for the 2 children due to a judge's error in jury instructions. He was ultimately executed based on the death sentence for the murder of Anita Richardson. Tarantine requested a large meal consisting of 10 pieces of fried chicken, fried catfish, and 10 slices of cheesecake. Despite his earlier confessions, Tarantine proclaimed his innocence in his final statement. I've always maintained I've been innocent of crimes charged. This is a violation of my 14th Amendment rights. It's not over. With that being said, Mom, Dad, I love you all. Be strong. Richard Alford Thornburg Jr., April 18, 2006. At 40 years old, he was the first person executed in Oklahoma that year. Thornburg was convicted of a brutal triple homicide and arson that took place on September 28, 1996. The victims were James Donald Potteet, 51, Terry Lynn Shepard, 39, and Keith Allen Smith, 24. Thornburg and 2 accomplices, Glenn Anderson and Roger Embry, went to Potteet's home seeking revenge because Thornburg believed Potteet was involved in a previous shooting where Thornburg had been wounded. The victims were held at gunpoint and injected with an overdose of drugs. Potteet, Shepard, and Smith were then shot and left inside the house, which the attackers doused with gasoline and set on fire. A 4th man, Donald Brent Scott, was held at gunpoint by the trio and he was shot by another hostage, Marvin Matheson. Despite being shot in the chest, Scott managed to crawl out of the burning building and survived to testify against Thornburg. Thornburg's final meal was a KFC dinner consisting of fried chicken, potato wedges, apple pie, and Pepsi. Before the lethal injection was administered, he expressed remorse to the families of his victims. I just want to say I'm sorry for all the pain I've caused. I'm truly ashamed of my actions. I wish I could take it back. He was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. His accomplices also faced justice. Glenn Anderson was sentenced to death, while Roger Embry received multiple life sentences. John Albert Bolts, June 1, 2006. At 74 years old, he was the oldest inmate executed in Oklahoma's history at that time. Bolts was executed for the first-degree murder of his 22-year-old stepson, Douglas Doug Kirby, on April 18, 1984. After his wife requested a divorce, an enraged Bolts threatened to kill her son. When Kirby confronted him, Bolts stabbed and beat him to death, near decapitating him with a hunting knife. Despite being offered a plea bargain for manslaughter, Bolts refused, claiming self-defense. His last meal consisted of 3 apple-filled rolls and 2 bottles of water. Bolts expressed no remorse, stating he was going to a better place and suggesting a grim fate for those involved in his conviction. He cited a Bible passage regarding eye for an eye, which the victim's family perceived as a final threat. Eric Allen Patton, August 29, 2006. He was 49 years old and became the 82nd person executed in Oklahoma. Patton was convicted of the 1994 first-degree murder of Charlene Cower, a 56-year-old Oklahoma City woman. A former handyman for the victim, Patton forced his way into the home where he brutally attacked and stabbed her multiple times. He was linked to the crime by fingerprints on a weapon. While appealing, Patton admitted to the killing but claimed he was in a cocaine delirium and under the influence of demonic forces, arguing a lack of intent. His last meal consisted of a pizza with sausage, pepperoni, and mushrooms paired with a grape soda. In his final statement, Patton thanked his legal team, family, and prison staff. He also expressed his faith in Jesus Christ. Patton's execution was the first in Oklahoma to use a modified lethal injection protocol with an increased dosage of anesthesia following a lawsuit he filed challenging the method. James Patrick Mallicoat, August 31, 2006. He was 31 years old at the time of his death. He was convicted of the first-degree murder of his 13-month-old daughter, Tessa Leadford. The murder occurred in February 1997. Mallicoat had been caring for the child for 19 days while her mother was at work. Authorities found that the child had suffered extensive abuse, including abdominal bleeding, broken ribs, bite marks, and widespread bruising. Mallicoat admitted to punching the toddler in the stomach twice and hitting her head against a dresser. After punching the child so hard she stopped breathing, Mallicoat performed CPR to revive her, but then he laid down to take a nap. When he woke up, she was dead. He placed her in her crib and went back to sleep. The child's mother, Mary Ann Leadford, was also convicted of first-degree murder for failing to stop the abuse, and she was sentenced to life in prison. For his last meal, Mallicoat requested a large spread. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes and gravy, corn on the cob, biscuits, a mini apple pie, and a large Dr. Pepper. While strapped to the gurney, Mallicoat expressed remorse for his actions. His last words were, "I just want to tell everyone how sorry I am that this had to have happened, any of it. I'm sorry I caused the death of another human, but there's nothing I can do to change it." He further claimed to have reflected on the events for years and hoped those involved could move on. He concluded by thanking his supporters and stating, "That's just about it." Corey Dwayne Hamilton, January 9, 2007. He was 38 years old and became the first person executed in the U.S. that year. Hamilton was convicted for his role as the gunman in the first-degree murders of 4 restaurant employees during a 1992 robbery at a Tulsa chicken restaurant. The victims, all young adults, were forced into a freezer and shot. While his 3 accomplices received life sentences, Hamilton received the death penalty for being the trigger man. His last meal was a large barbecue platter, including ribs, brisket, and hot links. In his last words, Hamilton expressed religious sentiments, asking for peace for the victims' families, and quoted, "Into thy hands I commit my spirit, O Lord." Jimmy Dale Bland, June 26, 2007. At 49 years old, he was notable for being terminally ill with advanced lung cancer that had spread to his brain at the time of his death. Bland was executed for the first-degree murder of Doyle Wendell Raines, 62, the popular former mayor of Manitou, Oklahoma. The murder happened in 1996. Raines had hired Bland, who had been out of prison for less than a year, as a handyman and construction helper. After an argument in Raines' garage on November 14, 1996, Bland shot Raines in the back of the head with a .22 caliber rifle. He then hid the body in a nearby field under logs and was caught 2 days later while driving Raines' Cadillac. Bland was a two-time killer. In 1975, at just 17 years old, he was convicted of manslaughter for killing Raymond Prentice and kidnapping Prentice's wife and young son. He served 20 years of a 60-year sentence before being released and killing Raines roughly a year later. For his last meal, Bland requested a spread including hot and spicy chicken breast, 2 slices of sausage pizza with extra cheese, German chocolate cake, 1 pint of French vanilla ice cream, and a Dr. Pepper. He used his final moments to apologize to his family, though a malfunctioning sound system made much of his statement inaudible to witnesses. He was heard saying, "I'm sorry for what happened. I love you all. I love you all. I'm ready." His execution sparked significant legal and ethical debate because his doctors estimated he had only 6 months to live due to his cancer. His attorneys argued the execution was naked vengeance, while prosecutors maintained his illness did not excuse the nature of his crimes. Frank Dwayne Welch, August 21, 2007. He was 45 years old at the time of his death. Welch was convicted of the first-degree murder of Joe Tally Cooper, a 28-year-old woman in Norman, Oklahoma. On February 25, 1987, Welch gained entry to Cooper's home by posing as a cable TV repairman. He used his former employee uniform to deceive her. Cooper, who was 3 months pregnant, was bound with leather straps and duct tape, essayed, and strangled to death while her 7-month-old son was in a nearby room. The case remained cold for 10 years until 1997, when DNA evidence linked Welch to the scene. He was identified after a similar DNA profile was found at another unsolved murder site, that of Deborah Stevens. She was killed in a nearly identical manner in Grady County just 3 months after Cooper. At the time he was linked to these murders, Welch was already serving prison time for attempted kidnapping and assault. For his last meal, Welch ordered a pizza and soda. He used his final words to express deep remorse and take full responsibility for the murders he committed. While strapped to the gurney at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary on August 21, 2007, he addressed the families of his victims and said he was ready. He was pronounced dead shortly after 6 p.m. One of Welch's brothers collapsed in the viewing room during the procedure. Terry Lynn Short, June 17, 2008. He was the first person executed in Oklahoma following a national suspension of capital punishment during a U.S. Supreme Court challenge to lethal injection procedures. Short was convicted of the first-degree murder of Ken Yamamoto, a 22-year-old exchange student from Japan attending Oklahoma City University. On January 8, 1995, following a breakup with his girlfriend, Brenda Gardner, Short threw a homemade firebomb, a gasoline-filled bottle, into her apartment at the Royal Chateau Apartments in South Oklahoma City. Gardner and her sister escaped, but Robert Hines, a visitor, suffered second and third-degree burns over 35% of his body. The fire spread rapidly, causing the apartment directly above, where Ken Yamamoto was sleeping, to collapse into the inferno. Yamamoto awoke surrounded by flames and suffered thermal burns to 95% of his body. He died several hours later in the hospital. Short was also convicted of 5 counts of attempting to kill for the other residents who were present during the attack. For his last meal, he requested 10 pieces of fried chicken. Before the execution began, Short acknowledged his family members but declined to make a formal final statement, saying only, "I have nothing to say." Witnesses noted that he cried just before the procedure began. Jesse James Cummings Jr., September 25, 2008. He was 52 years old. He was executed for the 1991 murder of his 11-year-old niece, Melissa Moody. Prosecutors described Cummings as a cruel patriarch and bigamist who lived with 2 wives, Juanita and Sherry. He was accused of orchestrating the killing of his half-sister, Judy Moody Mayo, Melissa's mother, while he was out of town. Following his sister's murder, Cummings was accused of essaying his niece before taking her to a bridge over the Clear Boggy River in rural Choctaw County, where he stabbed her to death. Her skeletal remains were discovered a month later. While initially convicted of both murders, his conviction for his sister's death was overturned in 1998. However, the death sentence for the murder of his niece was upheld. For his last meal, Cummings requested a bucket of KFC, 8 additional drumsticks, and a chocolate milkshake. He had also requested 4 tacos, but they were not provided as the meal cost exceeded the $15 limit. While strapped to the gurney, Cummings proclaimed his innocence and criticized the legal system. "I love my family, I love my children, I love my gorgeous angel. The justice system let me down on this case. It turned a blind eye to the truth in this. You came here today to see an innocent man die. I forgive everybody involved in this." Darwin Demond Brown, January 22, 2009. He was 32 years old at the time of his death. On February 26, 1995, Brown and 3 accomplices, Michael Lee Wilson, Billy Don Elverson, and Richard Harjo, robbed a Quick Trip convenience store in Tulsa. The store clerk, Richard Kevin Yost, 30, was dragged into a walk-in cooler where he was handcuffed and bound with duct tape. The attackers beat Yost to death with an aluminum baseball bat. A surveillance tape recorded the sounds of the attack, including 54 audible pings from the bat strikes. Former District Attorney Bill LaFortune described the crime as 4 men and a bat versus 1 defenseless man. Michael Wilson and Billy Elverson were also sentenced to death and later executed. Richard Harjo, who was 16 at the time of the crime, received a life sentence without parole. Brown requested a large barbecue-themed meal: barbecued ribs, chopped beef, and hot links, baked beans and plain potato chips, coconut donuts, and chocolate milk. Before the execution, Brown apologized to the Yost family and thanked his own family for their support. "I apologize for anybody I hurt. I'm sorry to everybody. I'd like to thank all of my family for the support that they've given me." He also looked through the witness glass and mouthed "I love you" to his father. Donald Lee Gilson, May 14, 2009. Gilson was convicted of the 1995 first-degree murder of Shane Kaufman, his girlfriend's 8-year-old son. He severely beat the boy, causing him to die in a bathtub, and hid the body in a freezer for 6 months. Autopsies revealed extreme systemic abuse, including numerous broken bones. Bertha Jean Kaufman, the child's mother, received life without parole for her involvement. For his final meal, Gilson requested a cheeseburger, chili cheese french fries, and a chocolate shake from Chili's. Maintaining his innocence, he stated, "I am an innocent man, but I get to go to heaven. I'll see Shane tonight. It's God's will that this take place." His execution proceeded after the governor denied the clemency petition. Michael Paul DeLozier, July 9, 2009. He was 32 years old. He was convicted of murdering two campers, Orville Lewis Bullard, 60, and Paul Stephen Morgan, 54, on September 24, 1995. During a robbery, DeLozier and accomplices shot the victims and set fire to their camp, burning the bodies. Two accomplices were also involved in the incident. For his last meal, DeLozier requested a T-bone steak, French fries, and a large salad. While he declined to make a final statement, a written statement from him was released in which he apologized to the victims' families. Julius Ricardo Young, January 14, 2010. He was 60 years old at the time of his death. Young was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder for the brutal beating deaths of Joyland Morgan, 20, his former girlfriend's daughter, Kewan Morgan, 6, Joyland's son, and his former girlfriend's grandson. On October 1, 1993, Young broke into their Tulsa apartment. Prosecutors argued he was enraged because Joyland's mother, Joycelyn Edwards, had recently ended their relationship and refused to give him a key to her new apartment, stating she wanted her daughter and grandson to feel safe. Young used the key he had kept to the victim's previous residence to gain entry, broke a security chain, and used a baseball bat to beat them to death. Joyland was found with at least 13 blows to her face and head, and Kewan was killed in his bed by 2 massive head fractures. While the murder weapon was never found, several pieces of evidence linked Young to the crime. A piece of a broken security chain, matching the one from the crime scene, was seen falling out of Young's pocket the morning after the murders. Police recovered a shoe from Young's residence with a spot of human blood consistent with both victims. Young claimed it was fish blood, but DNA testing refuted this. Witnesses saw a baseball bat in Young's car the night before the murder, which was missing the following day. For his last meal, Young requested a spread including sirloin steak, baked potato, onion rings, tossed salad, and Coke. He maintained his innocence until the end, describing his execution as a miscarriage of justice. His last statement included, "I didn't take the lives of Joyland Morgan and her son Kewan. My attorney failed me. It's a tragedy. I'm an innocent man. To my family, I love you." His mother, Eileen Young, was present and responded to him through the witness glass, saying, "I love you. You'll see me in the morning, son. Good night." Donald Ray Wackerly II, October 14, 2010. He was 41 years old. Wackerly was convicted of the first-degree murder and robbery of Pan Sayakumane, a 51-year-old Laotian immigrant. On September 7, 1996, Wackerly and his then-wife Michelle went to the Arkansas River specifically looking for someone to rob. They encountered Sayakumane, who was fishing alone. Wackerly shot him between 7 and 9 times with a .22 caliber rifle. He then stole the victim's tackle box and fishing gear, then pushed the victim's pickup truck into the river to hide the body. He later pawned the stolen items. The case went cold for months until Wackerly's estranged wife came forward to describe the events. She was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. Wackerly maintained his innocence until his death, claiming he had been framed. His last meal was a Pizza Hut medium stuffed crust pizza with the following: mushrooms, bell peppers, black olives, and jalapenos, a slice of coconut cream pie and a chocolate milkshake, and a Dr. Pepper. Having converted to Buddhism while in prison, Wackerly spent his final moments chanting a Buddhist mantra. He requested 2 spiritual advisors to be present near the death chamber. He repeatedly recited the 6-syllable mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of ultimate compassion. He smiled and nodded toward his attorneys and spiritual advisors through the glass before the sedative took effect. John David Duty, December 16, 2010. He gained national attention as the first person in the U.S. to be executed using pentobarbital, a sedative typically used to euthanize animals, following a nationwide shortage of the state's standard anesthetic. Duty was serving 3 life sentences for a 1978 conviction when he murdered his cellmate, 22-year-old Curtis Wise Jr., in December 2001. Duty tricked Wise into being bound, claiming it was for a transfer, before strangling him. Following the murder, Duty wrote a letter to Wise's mother stating he felt no remorse. He pleaded guilty and told the court he would kill again if not executed. He requested a large final meal, which included a double cheeseburger with mayo, a foot-long Connie hot dog, a cherry limeade, and a large banana shake. In his last statement, Duty apologized to the victim's family, asking for their forgiveness and expressed religious sentiments. Witnesses reported that he continued to repeat, "Thank you, Lord," as he lost consciousness. Billy Dawn Alverson, January 6, 2011. Alverson was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary on January 6, 2011, for his role in the 1995 murder of a convenience store clerk. At 39 years old, his execution was the first in the U.S. for the year 2011. Alverson was convicted for the first-degree murder of Richard Kevin Yost, 30, the night manager of a Quick Trip convenience store in Tulsa. The incident took place on February 26, 1995. Alverson and 3 accomplices, Darwin Demond Brown, Michael Lee Wilson, and Richard Harjo, robbed the store. The group dragged Yost into a walk-in cooler, bound his hands and feet, and beat him to death with an aluminum baseball bat. Surveillance video captured the sounds of the attack, including 54 strikes from that bat. While Alverson admitted to being present, he maintained throughout his appeals that he never hit Yost himself. However, prosecutors argued he was a willing participant who helped bind the victim and later possessed stolen items from the robbery at his home. Brown was executed in 2009 and Wilson was executed in 2014. Harjo, who was a juvenile at the time, was sentenced to life without parole. For his last meal, Alverson requested a large pepperoni and Italian sausage pizza and a large Dr. Pepper. He used his final statement to apologize to the victim's family and comfort his own relatives. First, to the Yost family, "I would like to say I'm sorry, forgive me." And to my own family, "I'm all right, God is good, don't you cry. Don't do it, I'm all right." He then mouthed "I love you" and made a kissing motion toward his family members in the viewing room. Jeffrey David Matthews, January 11, 2011. His execution was notable for being delayed 3 times in 2010 due to investigations into his claims of innocence and the nationwide shortage of execution drugs. Matthews was convicted of the first-degree murder of his 77-year-old great-uncle, Otis Earl Short. On January 27, 1994, Matthews and an accomplice, Tracy Dyer, broke into the Shorts' home in Rosedale, Oklahoma, to rob them of hidden cash. Prosecutors established that Matthews shot Otis Earl Short once in the back of the head at close range with a .45 caliber pistol. Dyer attacked Short's wife, Minnie Short, 75, cutting her throat with a knife. The pair searched the house for nearly 2 hours, eventually fleeing in the victim's pickup truck with $500 in cash and a .32 caliber pistol. Minnie Short survived the initial attack and sought help from a passing ambulance. She later died of natural causes. Matthews was arrested the following day after police traced a phone call made from the house to Dyer's uncle. Matthew's final meal consisted of a deep dish meat lover's pizza, deep-fried jumbo shrimp with cocktail sauce, 2 hush puppies with vinegar sauce. He maintained his innocence until his death. In his final statement, he thanked his family and buddies on death row for their support. His most widely reported final words were a jab at the governor. "I think that the governor's phone is broke. He ain't called yet." He also told his relatives, "I hate to see you all in this situation. I'm sitting here enjoying my last moments. Enjoy your lives." Gary Rowland Welch, January 5, 2012. At 49 years old, he became the first person executed in the U.S. that year. Welch was convicted of the first-degree murder of 35-year-old Robert Dean Hardcastle. On August 25, 1994, Welch and an accomplice, Claudie Conover, confronted Hardcastle in a drug-related dispute. Witnesses testified that after an initial assault, Welch chased the fleeing victim and fatally stabbed him with a knife and a broken beer bottle. Despite his claims of self-defense, Welch was sentenced to death. For his last meal, Welch ordered fish from a fast food chain. In his final statement, he thanked peers for supporting him, and as the execution started, he made remarks referencing Norse mythology. Timothy Sean Stemple, March 15, 2012. He was 46 years old at the time of his death. Stemple was convicted of the first-degree murder of his wife, Trisha Stemple, 30, to collect nearly $1 million in life insurance benefits. He orchestrated a plan with his mistress's 16-year-old cousin, Terry Hunt. They feigned car trouble on a Tulsa highway, and when Trisha stepped out of the vehicle, she was attacked. According to testimony, she was beaten repeatedly with a plastic-wrapped baseball bat. After the initial beating, they attempted to run over her head with a pickup truck and eventually drove over her chest. When they later saw her crawling in the grass, Stemple ran her over with the truck at approximately 60 miles per hour to ensure she was dead. To make the murder look like a random hit and run, Stemple used a drill to puncture one of their car's tires. Stemple maintained his innocence until his execution, with his family arguing that Trisha died in a simple hit-and-run accident. Stemple's final meal consisted of a large stuffed crust pizza with extra cheese, half pepperoni and half Canadian bacon, and a 2-liter bottle of orange soda with ice. When asked if he had any final statement, Stemple simply shook his head no. He offered no final words before the lethal injection began. Michael Bascom Seltzer, May 1, 2012. He was 57 years old and had spent nearly 37 years on death row, one of the longest tenures in U.S. history. Seltzer was convicted of a violent 1975 crime spree in Tulsa that targeted several convenience stores. On September 15, 1975, Seltzer and an accomplice, Richard Dodson, robbed the U Totem store, and Seltzer shot the store manager, Clayton Chandler, 55, 6 to 8 times, killing him even after Chandler had complied with the robber's demands. During the same robbery, Dodson shot 20-year-old employee Ina Morris 7 times, but she survived. Earlier in their spree, Seltzer and Dodson shot clerk Frank Danier and stabbed clerk Naomi Wilson more than 20 times. Both survived. Seltzer was originally sentenced to death in 1976. When the U.S. Supreme Court later invalidated Oklahoma's mandatory death penalty, his sentence was commuted to life without parole. However, after successfully appealing for a new trial in 1996, he was resentenced to death in 1998. Seltzer requested a substantial KFC meal: 2 crispy chicken breasts, 1 wing, and an added thigh, potato wedges, baked beans, and 2 biscuits with honey, an apple turnover, salt, pepper, and ketchup. While strapped to the gurney, Seltzer addressed his son and sister. "My son, my sister, I love you. Till I see you again next time, be good. Eric, keep up the struggle. I'll be waiting at the gates of heaven for you. I hope the rest of you will make it there as well. I'm ready." Michael Edward Hooper, August 14, 2012. He was 40 years old. Hooper was convicted of the first-degree murders of his former girlfriend and her 2 young children on December 7, 1993. The victims were Cynthia Lynn Jarman, 23, her daughter Tonya, 5, and her son Timmy, 3. Hooper drove the victims to a field in Canadian County, northwest of Oklahoma City. Prosecutors allege that he shot Cynthia and Timmy twice in the head while they were in a pickup truck. 5-year-old Tonya witnessed the killings and attempted to escape into the woods. Hooper chased her, firing a shot that missed her but passed through the hood of her jacket, before catching and shooting her twice in the head to eliminate witnesses. He buried all 3 bodies in a single shallow grave and poured gasoline over them to deter wild animals. The victims were found 3 days later. Hooper requested a selection of various fruits and berries along with cranberry juice and coffee for his last meal. In his last statement, Hooper expressed religious sentiment, thanked his family, and indicated he was prepared for the execution. Gary Thomas Allen, November 6, 2012. He was 56 years old at the time of his death. Allen was convicted of the first-degree murder of his estranged fiancée, Lawana Gail Titsworth, 24, on November 21, 1986. 4 days after Titsworth moved out of their shared home with their two young sons, Alan confronted her at a daycare center in Oklahoma City as she arrived to pick up the children. After a brief argument, Alan pulled a .38 caliber revolver from his sock and shot Titsworth in the chest. As she attempted to flee into the building, he pushed a daycare employee aside, shoved Titsworth down the steps, and shot her 3 more times in the back at close range. When cornered by police in a nearby alley, Allen scuffled with an officer and attempted to make the officer shoot himself with his own service weapon. During the struggle, Allen was shot in the face, resulting in the loss of his left eye and permanent brain damage. His execution followed 26 years of legal battles regarding his mental competency. His attorneys argued that the gunshot wound to his head, combined with a history of schizophrenia and dementia, rendered him ineligible for the death penalty. Although a parole board recommended clemency in 2005, Governor Mary Fallin eventually denied the request, and the 2008 jury found him sane enough to be executed. For his last meal, Allen requested a large meat lover's pizza and a Pepsi. Because his execution was on Election Day 2012, Allen's final words were a rambling commentary on the presidential race between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. He stated, "Obama won 2 out of 3 counties. It's going to be a very close race." He followed this with garbled speech, several hellos to his attorneys, and a religious sentiment. "I hope that more realize Jesus is the Son of God, the one and only Savior." George Ochoa, December 4, 2012. Ochoa was convicted of the first-degree murders of Francisco Morales, 38, and his wife Maria Yanez, 35. On July 11, 1993, Ochoa and an accomplice, Osvaldo Torres, broke into the couple's Oklahoma City home. The victims were gunned down in their bedroom as they slept. Morales was shot 12 times and Yanez was shot 11 times. The couple's 3 children were in the house during the attack. Their 14-year-old daughter was awakened by the gunfire and contacted emergency services after seeing the 2 intruders. Police stopped Ochoa and Torres walking near the crime scene shortly after the murders. They were described as sweating and nervous. While both were sentenced to death, Torres' sentence was commuted to life without parole in 2004 by then-Governor Brad Henry due to concerns regarding international treaties and the Mexican consulate. For his last meal, Ochoa requested a large meat lover's pizza and a large Coke. Strapped to the gurney and maintaining his innocence to the end, his last words were, "I'm innocent." His attorneys had unsuccessfully appealed for a stay of execution based on claims that he was mentally unfit. Stephen Ray Thacker, March 12, 2013. He was 42 years old and was the first person executed in Oklahoma that year. Thacker was convicted of a 10-day, 3-state killing spree in late 1999 and early 2000, allegedly driven by a need for money for Christmas presents. His victims included Lacey Dawn Hill, 25, kidnapped, essayed, and murdered on December 23, 1999, Forrest Reed Boyd, 24, stabbed to death during a home burglary on January 1, 2000 in Aldrich, Missouri. Ray Patterson, 52, killed in Tennessee on January 2, 2000 after confronting Thacker about a stolen credit card. Thacker was executed for the murder of Lacey Hill. His last meal consisted of a large meat lover's pizza, peanut M&Ms, and a root beer. In his last statement, Thacker apologized to the victims' families, saying, "As God has forgiven me, I hope you will forgive me for the pain I've caused." James Louis DeRosa, June 18, 2013. He was 36 years old at the time of his death. DeRosa was convicted of the first-degree murders of an elderly couple, Curtis Plummer, 73, and Gloria Plummer, 70, on October 2, 2000 in Oklahoma. DeRosa had previously worked at the Plumbers' ranch and used the pretense of looking for more work to get the couple to let him and an accomplice, John Eric Castleberry, into their home. Once inside, they attacked the couple with knives, stabbing them multiple times and slitting their throats. The attack was a robbery that netted only $73 and the couple's pickup truck, which was later abandoned in a nearby lake. Castleberry testified against DeRosa in exchange for a sentence of life without parole. A third accomplice, Scotty White, who served as the getaway driver, received a 25-year sentence. DeRosa declined to request a special last meal. He was offered a standard meal served to the general prison population on the day of his execution, but denied accepting any food. When asked by the warden if he had any last statement, De Rosa simply replied, "No, ma'am." He reportedly stared at the ceiling and did not turn his head toward the witnesses. Though silent at his execution, De Rosa had previously expressed remorse during a clemency hearing, stating, "I take full responsibility for their deaths. If not for me, they wouldn't have died that night." Brian Darrell Davis, June 25, 2013. At 39 years old, he was the third inmate executed in Oklahoma that year. Davis was convicted of the first-degree murder and first-degree essay of Josephine Jody Sanford, the 52-year-old mother of his girlfriend, Stacy Sanford. The incident occurred on November 4, 2001. After a night of drinking, Davis returned to the apartment he shared with Stacy in Ponca City to find her and their 3-year-old daughter missing. He called Josephine, who became concerned and went to the apartment to look for them. At the apartment, Davis attacked Josephine. Prosecutors stated she was beaten, suffered a broken jaw, and she was stabbed 6 times. DNA evidence confirmed that Davis had essayed the victim during the attack. He initially offered conflicting stories, at one point claiming that the relation was consensual and that he stabbed her in self-defense after she attacked him during an argument. Shortly after the murder, Davis was seriously injured in a single-car accident while driving the victim's van. He was arrested for DUI and later linked to the murder. His case was notable because the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board voted 4-1 to recommend clemency, citing his expression of remorse and apology to the victim's family. However, the governor rejected the recommendation, stating she was satisfied that justice is being served given the brutality of the crime. Davis did not request a special last meal. He ate the standard prison dinner served that day: barbecue bologna, rice, bread, cookies, and a lemonade. His last words were, "First, I would like to say I would like to give the glory to God. I shall not die but live. His word is my will, and I let His will be done. I give God the last word. Thank you." Anthony Roselle Banks, September 10, 2013. His execution followed a conviction for a decades-old cold case that was finally solved using advanced DNA technology. Banks was executed for the 1979 murder of Sun Kim Travis, a 24-year-old abducted from a Tulsa apartment complex whose body was discovered with fatal injuries. DNA evidence eventually linked Banks and an accomplice to the cold case. Before his execution, Banks was already serving a life sentence for the 1978 killing of clerk David Freeman and had a history of violent felony convictions. For his last meal, Banks requested 3 apple-filled rolls and 2 bottles of water. In his last statement, Banks expressed remorse, calling his execution justified, and said, "I can't express the terrible things I've done. To know that I took lives hurts me. This is justified. I've done one good thing in my life, and that is to become a Jehovah's Witness. For that, I'm eternally grateful." He also addressed Tulsa County Sheriff Stanley Glantz, saying, "I haven't seen you in years, decades. God bless you. I love you, and I will see you again." Ronald Clinton Lott, December 10, 2013. Lott was convicted of the first-degree murders and essays of 2 elderly women in Oklahoma City more than 25 years prior. Anna Laura Fowler, 83, was murdered on September 2, 1986. Lott broke into her home through a back door, essayed her, and bound her hands with a knotted cloth. She died from asphyxiation. Zelma Cutler was 93, and she was murdered on January 11, 1987. Cutler lived across the street from Fowler. Lott cut her phone wire and shut off her electricity at the breaker box before entering, essaying, and killing her. The case is notable because another man, Robert Lee Miller Jr., was initially convicted, and he spent 11 years in prison, 7 on death row, for these crimes. DNA evidence eventually cleared Miller and linked Lott to the murders, while Lott was already serving time for essaying 2 other elderly women. For his last meal, Lott requested a Long John Silver's dinner consisting of fish, fries, hush puppies, tartar sauce, and ketchup. At his execution, Lott made no final statement. However, during his clemency hearing in November, he expressed remorse to the victims' families. "I am so sorry for what I've done, and I'd ask them to forgive me. I caused them so much hurt and pain." During the execution procedure, he remained silent but nodded to his brother, who was the only relative present in the witness room. Johnny Dale Black, December 17, 2013. He was 48 years old at the time of his death. Black was executed for the first-degree murder of 54-year-old Bill Pogue. On January 4, 1998, Black and his accomplices mistook Pogue's SUV for a target's vehicle, forcing it off the road. Pogue was fatally beaten and stabbed 11 times, while his son-in-law, Rick Lewis, was also severely stabbed, but he survived. Black had a previous 1984 manslaughter conviction, for which he served 9 years. He requested a catfish dinner with fries and blackberry cobbler. His last statement focused on his mother, expressing love and questioning the purpose of the execution. Michael Lee Wilson, January 9, 2014. Wilson was convicted of the first-degree murder of his co-worker, Richard Kevin Yost, 30, who was the night manager of a Quick Trip convenience store in Tulsa. The murder happened on February 26, 1995. Wilson and three accomplices, Darvin Brown, Billy Alverson, and Richard Harjo, ambushed Yost during his shift. They dragged him into a walk-in cooler, handcuffed him, and bound his ankles. Yost was beaten to death with an aluminum baseball bat. Surveillance audio recorded the sound of 54 strikes from the bat over roughly 2 minutes while Yost pleaded for mercy. While Yost lay dying, Wilson donned Yost's store uniform and worked the cash register to avoid suspicion while his accomplices stole the store's safe. At the time of the murder, Wilson was out on bond for an accessory to murder charge related to a 1994 drive-by shooting. For his last meal, Wilson requested a stuffed crust pizza with Parmesan cheese, a cherry Dr. Pepper, a pomegranate, a cherry mash candy bar. His last moments became the subject of national debate due to his reaction to the lethal drugs. His last words were, "I feel my whole body burning." Before the drugs were administered, he also said, "I love everybody. Free is free. I'm going home. I'm ready to go. I love you, world. Love my daughters for me. I'm going to miss you always." In a final attempt to right a wrong just before his death, he also confessed to being the sole shooter in the 1994 drive-by killing, claiming that two other men serving life for that crime were innocent. Kenneth Eugene Hogan, January 23, 2014. He was executed for the 1988 murder of a young woman who was a close family friend. On January 28, 1988, Hogan attacked Lisa Renee Stanley, 21, a student and young wife, in her Oklahoma City apartment. Hogan had met Stanley through church and she had frequently babysat for him and his wife. Prosecutors established that Hogan stabbed Stanley more than 25 times in the back, neck, and chest. After the killing, Hogan rearranged the apartment to make it appear as if an intruder had broken in and robbed the home. He admitted to the stabbing, but claimed it was in self-defense after Stanley allegedly lunged at him with a knife during an argument. A jury rejected his version of events, finding him guilty of first-degree murder. There are no records of his last meal. He used his final moments to accept responsibility and apologize. "I am guilty for what I'm here for, and I take full responsibility for my actions. And to Lisa's family, I say I'm sorry that I can't undo it, and I am sorry to my family for all the pain I've caused." As the execution drugs were administered, Hogan added, "There's a chemical taste in my mouth. I'm going, I'm going, I'm going." Clayton Darrell Lockett, April 29, 2014. Lockett was executed in a procedure that became one of the most controversial in U.S. history after it was severely botched. He was sentenced to death for the 1999 murder of Stephanie Nyman, a 19-year-old high school graduate. Lockett and two accomplices, while in the middle of a home robbery, abducted Nyman and two other victims. When Nyman refused to promise she wouldn't go to the police, Lockett shot her twice with a 12-gauge shotgun. Despite the gunshot wounds, she did not die immediately. Lockett then ordered his accomplice to bury her alive in a shallow grave. During the same crime spree, Lockett and his accomplices essayed another female victim and severely beat a male friend of Nyman's. For his final meal, Lockett requested a Chateaubriand steak, a large cut of tenderloin, but his request was denied because it exceeded the state's $15 price limit for last meals. He reportedly rejected the alternative meal offered by the prison. When officially asked for final words, Lockett simply said no. However, during the botched execution, after he was supposed to be unconscious, he began writhing and he was heard saying, "Oh man," and "something's wrong." The execution drew international attention because it lasted 43 minutes. Oklahoma was using a new, untested three-drug cocktail, including midazolam, because of a shortage of standard drugs. A medical technician failed to properly place the IV, which was eventually inserted into a vein in Lockett's groin. The vein ruptured, causing the lethal drugs to leak into the surrounding tissue instead of his bloodstream. Lockett was declared unconscious, but several minutes later he began to convulse, gasp, and speak. The warden ordered the blinds to the viewing gallery closed as the situation grew chaotic. The execution was eventually halted, but Lockett died of a massive heart attack shortly after. His death led to a temporary moratorium on executions in Oklahoma and a U.S. Supreme Court case regarding the constitutionality of using midazolam in lethal injections. Charles Frederick Warner, January 15, 2015. Warner was convicted of the first-degree murder and first-degree essay of Adriana Waller, the 11-month-old daughter of his then-girlfriend. The incident happened on August 22, 1997. While the child's mother was out running errands, Warner was left alone with Adriana and his own children. When the mother returned, the baby was unconscious and unresponsive. An autopsy revealed the infant died from multiple severe injuries, including a crushed skull, brain damage, a broken jaw, 3 fractured ribs, and a lacerated liver. Doctors also found physical evidence of a violent essay. Warner's own son testified that he saw his father shaking the baby. He initially claimed the injuries were accidental, but later admitted to police that he had lost it. For his final meal, Warner requested a diverse spread: a McDonald's Big Mac meal, no onions, boneless hot wings, potato wedges, coleslaw and fruit cups, a mixed bag of gummy worms, and a Coke. Warner maintained his innocence during his final moments, stating, "I'm not a monster. I didn't do everything they said I did." As the execution procedure began, he made several distressed comments. "They poked me 5 times. It hurt. It feels like acid. My body is on fire." Months after his death, an autopsy report revealed that Oklahoma had mistakenly used potassium acetate instead of the state-mandated potassium chloride to stop his heart. This revelation, following the previously botched Lockett execution, led to an indefinite hold on executions in Oklahoma as the state overhauled its protocols. John Marion Grant, October 28, 2021. He was 60 years old and he was the first person executed in Oklahoma following a 6-year moratorium caused by previously botched executions. Grant was sentenced to death for the first-degree murder of Gay Carter, 58, a prison cafeteria worker at the Dick Connor Correctional Center. The murder happened on November 13, 1998. At the time of the killing, Grant was already serving a 130-year sentence for several armed robberies. After an argument over a breakfast tray, Grant followed Carter into a storage closet and stabbed her 16 times with a homemade shank. Grant's attorneys unsuccessfully argued for clemency, claiming he was in a heat of passion due to a romantic relationship with Carter, a claim her family strongly denied and called heinous. Grant requested a substantial final meal consisting of 2 bacon cheeseburgers with onions, tomatoes, pickles, lettuce, and mustard, barbecue chips and a large package of Nutter Butter cookies, half a gallon of Neapolitan ice cream, and a 2-liter bottle of Pib Extra. Before the execution began, Grant repeatedly yelled, "Let's go, let's go, let's go." Once the curtain was raised, he shouted a stream of profanities before the lethal drugs were administered. Grant's execution was widely reported as botched after he suffered a violent reaction to the sedative midazolam. Witnesses stated he suffered full-body convulsions and vomited repeatedly for several minutes before being declared unconscious. An autopsy later confirmed he had aspirated on his vomit and suffered flash pulmonary edema, a condition where fluid quickly fills the lungs, creating a sensation of drowning. Bigler Job Stauffer II, December 9, 2021. At 79 years old, he was the oldest inmate ever put to death in Oklahoma. Stauffer was convicted of the first-degree murder of 35-year-old schoolteacher Linda Reeves and the attempted murder of her boyfriend, Douglas Doug Ivans, in January 1985. Stauffer was dating Ivans's estranged wife, Velva, and sought to gain access to Ivans's $2 million life insurance policy. He went to Ivans's home to borrow a gun, then used that same weapon to shoot Ivans 3 times, including once in the face. He then fatally shot Reeves twice in the head while she slept on a sofa. Prosecutors alleged Stauffer placed the gun in Reeves's hand to make the crime look like a murder-suicide. His plan failed because Ivans survived and identified him as the shooter. His 1985 conviction was overturned in 1999 due to ineffective counsel, but he was convicted and sentenced to death again at a 2003 retrial. Stauffer did not request a special last meal. He was served the standard prison meal for that evening, which was a chicken patty and 2 slices of bread, fries, broccoli, and mixed fruit, 2 cookies, a fruit drink, and a bottle of water. Maintaining his innocence until the end, Stauffer smiled and laughed with his spiritual advisor in the chamber before his final statement. "My request is that my father forgive them. Thank you." By them, he reportedly meant his executioners and those involved in his case. Donald Anthony Grant, January 27, 2022. Grant was sentenced to death for the brutal double murder of 2 hotel employees on July 18, 2001, at the La Quinta Inn in Del City, Oklahoma. The victims were Brenda McKellia, 29, the hotel manager, and Felicia Suzette Smith, 43, a front desk clerk. Grant, then 25, robbed the hotel to get $200 to bail his girlfriend out of jail. To ensure there were no witnesses, he attacked both women. Both victims were shot and stabbed. Smith was also bludgeoned and had her neck twisted in a scene described by investigators as resembling a Stephen King movie. The execution drew international attention because Grant had been diagnosed multiple times with schizophrenia and had significant brain damage stemming from severe childhood abuse. His attorneys argued unsuccessfully that executing someone with such a severe mental illness was unconstitutional. For his last meal, Grant had sesame chicken and shrimp fried rice, egg rolls, and a large apple fritter. He specified in his request that if the fritter was unavailable, he wanted 3 pints of strawberry ice cream. Grant delivered a disjointed 2-minute monologue while strapped to the gurney, even continuing to speak after prison staff cut off his microphone. His final statements included, "Yo God, I got this. Brooklyn for life. No medication. I didn't take nothing. I'm going to go to the universe and then I'll be back. God is here, the true God." Witnesses noted that he appeared to be crying as the procedure began, though he expressed no formal apology in his final moments. Gilbert Ray Postel, February 17, 2022. He was just 35 years old at the time of his execution. On Memorial Day, May 30, 2005, Postel, along with his father, brother, and another accomplice, carried out a blitz attack at a mobile home park in Oklahoma City. Postel believed one of the victims was responsible for a 2004 motorcycle accident that had left his father with severe brain injuries. Prosecutors found no evidence that any of the victims were involved in that crash. Postel fired more than 30 rounds from a rifle during the ambush. He was convicted of murdering Donnie Swindle, 49, Amy Wright, 26, James Elderson, 57, and Terry Smith, 56. Postel received 2 death sentences for the murders of Wright and Elderson, whom he pursued and shot from behind as they tried to flee, and 2 life sentences for the other deaths. For his last meal, he requested a large McDonald's-style meal totaling approximately 4,000 calories. It included 20 chicken nuggets with ranch, barbecue, and honey mustard dipping sauces, 3 large orders of fries with ketchup, 2 chicken sandwiches, 1 crispy, 1 regular, 1 large cola, and 1 caramel frappe. When asked if he had a last statement, Postel simply shook his head no and offered no last words. James Allen Coddington, August 25, 2022. He was executed for the 1997 murder of 73-year-old Albert Hale. At 50, he was the 5th person executed in Oklahoma since the state resumed capital punishment in 2021. On March 5, 1997, Coddington went to the home of his friend and co-worker, Albert Troy Hale, to borrow $50 for cocaine following a multi-day drug binge. When Hale refused and urged Coddington to seek drug treatment, Coddington grabbed a claw hammer from the kitchen and struck Hale in the head at least 3 to 5 times. After the attack, Coddington stole approximately $525 from Hale's pocket and proceeded to rob 6 more convenience stores and gas stations before being arrested 2 days later. Hale was found alive but severely injured by one of his sons. He died in the hospital the following day. Coddington requested a substantial meal consisting of 2 cheeseburgers, 2 crunchy fish sandwiches, 2 large orders of fries, and a large soda. While strapped to the gurney, Coddington addressed his family, friends, and lawyers, thanking them for their love. He also directed his final comments to Governor Kevin Stitt, who had denied his clemency recommendation just a day prior. To all my family and friends, lawyers, everyone who's been around me and loved me, thank you. Governor Stitt, I don't blame you, and I forgive you. Despite expressing deep remorse during his clemency hearing earlier that month, media witnesses and Hale's family noted that Coddington did not apologize to the victim's family or mention Albert Hale in his last moments. Benjamin Robert Cole Sr., October 20, 2022. He was convicted and sentenced to death for the 2002 murder of his 9-month-old daughter, Brianna Victoria Cole. On December 20, 2002, while at home in Rogers County, Cole became frustrated with the infant's crying. He physically assaulted the child, inflicting fatal internal injuries. Medical reports indicated that the infant suffered a fractured spine and significant internal bleeding. Cole later confessed to the crime. His legal team unsuccessfully appealed the execution for years, arguing that he was not mentally competent due to schizophrenia and a brain lesion. Cole did not request a special last meal. Instead, he received a standard vegetarian religious meal provided by the facility. The meal included vegetarian lasagna, salad, a tortilla, a fruit drink packet. Before the execution was carried out, Cole spoke for approximately 2 minutes. His statement was largely religious in nature and delivered in a low voice. His final remarks included, "Choose Jesus while you still can. I forgive everyone that I have done wrong. Keep your eyes peeled. Be ready at all times." He also offered a prayer for the state and the country before being pronounced dead at 10:22 a.m. Richard Stephen Fairchild, November 17, 2022. He was 63 years old, executed on his 63rd birthday for a 1993 murder. Fairchild was convicted of the first-degree murder of Adam Broomhall, his girlfriend's 3-year-old son, on November 14, 1993, in Del City, Oklahoma. After a day of heavy drinking with the boy's mother, he attacked the child because he had wet the bed. Fairchild beat the toddler and burned both sides of the child's body by holding him against a searing wall furnace to stop his screaming. He then threw the 24-pound kid into a dining table, knocking him unconscious. Adam never regained consciousness and died from blunt force trauma to the head, having suffered 26 individual blows to his little body. His legal team argued that Fairchild suffered from severe mental illness and brain damage from his time as a boxer and in the military, which they claim contributed to the crime. For his last meal, he requested a fast food feast: 2 quarter-pounders with cheese, large French fries, large Coca-Cola, pumpkin pie, and a pint of chocolate ice cream. Strapped to the gurney, he expressed significant remorse and fate, which surprised some of the victim's family members. His final words were, "Today is a day for Adam, justice for Adam. I'm at peace with God. Don't grieve for me because I'm going home to meet my Heavenly Father. I've lived 29 years with this." He then apologized specifically to Adam's mother and grandmother. Fairchild reportedly had a smile on his face until he stopped breathing, which occurred at 10:24 a.m. Scott James Eisenberg, January 12, 2023. Eisenberg was sentenced to death for the 2003 murder of an elderly couple in Depew, Oklahoma. The victims were A.J. Cantrell, 76, and his wife Patsy Cantrell, 70. In October 2003, Eisenberg broke into the Cantrells' home to watch his ex-girlfriend, who lived across the street. When the couple returned home unexpectedly, he took them hostage. Prosecutors stated that Eisenberg shot Patsy Cantrell with a shotgun he found in their home and then used the same weapon to bludgeon A.J. Cantrell to death. Eisenberg later claimed the shooting of Patsy was an accident during a struggle with her husband. Following the murders, Eisenberg led authorities on a 37-day manhunt, one of the longest in Oklahoma history. He fled to Arkansas, took a physician and his family hostage, and was eventually captured in Texas after the doctor shot him during an escape attempt. For his last meal, Eisenberg requested a traditional medium-rare ribeye steak and 2 sides of fries. Strapped to the gurney, he expressed that he was at peace and loved his children. His last words were, "I'm at peace, my conscience is clear completely. I love my children." During the procedure, he was seen speaking with his spiritual advisor, Reverend Jeff Hood, and mouthed "I love you" to his daughter and lawyers in the witness room. Jermaine Montiel Cannon, July 20, 2023. Cannon was convicted of the first-degree murder of Sharonda White Clark, 20, on February 3, 1995 in Tulsa. Clark was found in her apartment with multiple stab wounds to her neck and chest. She also had defensive wounds on her hands, indicating she tried to fight back. At the time of the murder, Cannon was an escapee from a community work center in Walters, Oklahoma. He had been serving a 15-year sentence for a violent assault on an 18-year-old woman in 1990, whom he had beaten so severely with a toaster and a space heater that she suffered permanent brain damage. Cannon maintained throughout his appeals that he acted in self-defense after Clark allegedly attacked him with a knife, though a jury rejected this claim. For his final meal, Cannon requested a hearty selection of comfort foods: 2 double cheeseburgers, fried okra, a large order of French fries, and a large cherry limeade. In his final moments, Cannon addressed his family and said, "I confess with my mouth and believe in my heart that God raised Jesus from the dead. I am saved, I'm home." He also thanked his spiritual advisor and family members for their support. Following his execution, Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond stated that justice was finally served for Sharonda Clark and her 2 daughters. Anthony Castillo Sanchez, September 21, 2023. He was executed for the 1996 murder of a University of Oklahoma student. The victim was Julie Buskin, 21, a dance student who was abducted on December 20, 1996 from her apartment complex parking lot in Norman, Oklahoma. Buskin was taken to Lake Stanley Draper in Oklahoma City, where she was bound, essayed, and shot in the back of the head. The case remained cold for years until 2004, when DNA from genetic material on the victim's clothing was matched to Sanchez while he was serving time for an unrelated burglary. Prosecutors stated the odds of the DNA belonging to anyone else were 1 in 94 trillion. Sanchez maintained his innocence until his death, alleging that the DNA was fabricated or contaminated and claiming his late father was the true killer, a claim state officials debunked through further DNA testing. For his final meal, Sanchez requested a substantial spread of chicken fried steak with mashed potatoes and gravy, fried okra and a hot roll, apple pie with vanilla ice cream, and sweet iced tea. While strapped to the gurney, he used his final moments to proclaim his innocence again and criticize his legal representation. "I'm innocent, I didn't kill nobody." He also disparaged his former attorneys, calling them the worst lawyers ever in the state of Oklahoma, before thanking his supporters and spiritual advisor. Philip Dean Hancock, November 30, 2023. He was 59 years old and became the final person executed in the U.S. in 2023. Hancock was convicted of the April 2001 first-degree murders of 2 men in Oklahoma City. The victims were Robert Lee Jett Jr., 37, a homeowner in South Oklahoma City, and James Vincent Lynch III, 58, a friend of Jett's. The murders occurred during a physical altercation at Jett's home following a drug-related dispute over an open pack of cigarettes. Hancock claimed he acted in self-defense after being lured to the house and attacked with a metal bar. However, eyewitness testimony revealed that after shooting Jett inside the house, Hancock followed the wounded man into the backyard. When Jett said, "I'm going to die," Hancock reportedly responded, "Yes, you are," and shot him again. Hancock was a repeat offender who had previously been convicted of first-degree manslaughter for a separate 1982 fatal shooting in which he also claimed self-defense. He served less than 3 years of a 4-year sentence for that crime. For his final meal, he requested a bucket of KFC, root beer, and he requested no sides with his meal. Hancock maintained his innocence until the end, insisting he acted in self-defense all the way. He also used his final statement to criticize the prosecution under Attorney General Gentner Drummond. "I'm grateful for my lawyers. The prosecution are vile. They are virtueless. They are without honor." His execution proceeded even after the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board had voted 3-2 to recommend clemency, a recommendation Governor Kevin Stitt rejected just hours before the procedure. Michael Dwayne Smith, April 4, 2024. Smith was convicted of the first-degree murders of 2 people at different locations in Oklahoma City on February 22, 2002. The first victim was Janet Miller Moore, 41, a mother and hospital insurance clerk. Smith kicked in her door looking for her son, whom he mistakenly believed was a police informant. When she panicked and screamed, he shot her in the chest. The second victim was Sarath Babu Puluru, 22, a college student from India working as a convenience store clerk. Smith targeted the store because he believed an employee there had disrespected his gang, the Oak Grove Posse, in a newspaper article. He shot Puluru 9 times, doused his body with lighter fluid, and set it on fire. At the time of these murders, Smith was already a fugitive on the run for the 2001 shooting death of Otis Payne Jr. Smith declined to request a special last meal. Instead, he reportedly ate some remaining items he had from the prison canteen. When the warden asked if he had a last statement, Smith replied simply, "Nah, I'm good." His execution proceeded after the U.S. Supreme Court denied the final stay of execution. His attorneys had argued for clemency on the grounds of intellectual disability and drug-induced haze during his original confession, but the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board rejected these claims by a 4-1 vote. Richard Norman Rogem Jr., June 27, 2024. At 66 years old, he was the longest-serving death row inmate in Oklahoma's history at the time of his death. Rogem was convicted for the July 1984 kidnapping, essay, and murder of his 7-year-old former stepdaughter, Layla Dawn Cummings. On the night of July 6, 1984, Rogem abducted Layla from her Elk City apartment while her mother was working a late shift. Layla's brother, who was also in the apartment, identified Rogem as the intruder. The girl's body was found the following morning in a field near Burns Flat. She had been essayed and stabbed multiple times in the neck and private area. She was discovered face down, still wearing her mother's nightgown. Key evidence included a fingerprint on a cup found outside the apartment, a condom wrapper near the body that matched a used condom in Rogem's home, and tire tracks at the scene that matched his vehicle. Rogem was sentenced to death 3 separate times, in 1985, 2003, and 2007, as his first 2 convictions were overturned due to trial errors. He maintained his innocence throughout his 39 years on death row. For his final meal, Rogem requested a selection from Little Caesars and several sides. A small Little Caesars pizza, double cheese and double pepperoni, 2 vanilla ice cream cups, a bottle of Vernon's ginger ale, 8 salt packets, and 8 crushed red pepper packets. When the warden asked if he had any final statement while strapped to the gurney, Rogem declined to make a formal statement, simply saying, "I don't, I've said my goodbyes." Witnesses noted that he appeared to smile and give a thumbs up to a couple in the witness room before the procedure began. He was pronounced dead at 10:16 a.m. Emmanuel Littlejohn, September 26, 2024. Littlejohn was convicted of the first-degree murder of Kenneth Mears, 31, the co-owner of the Root and Scoot convenience store in southeast Oklahoma City. On June 19, 1992, Littlejohn and an accomplice, Glenn Bethany, robbed the store. During that robbery, Mears was shot in the face with a single bullet and killed. The case was highly contested because of conflicting evidence over who pulled the trigger. In separate trials, prosecutors argued that Bethany was the shooter during Bethany's trial, where he received life without parole, but then argued that Littlejohn was the shooter during Littlejohn's trial, where he received the death penalty. Due to these uncertainties, the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board voted 3-2 to recommend clemency, but Governor Kevin Stitt denied the request just minutes before the execution began. For his last meal, Littlejohn requested a large meat lover-style pizza, 2 slices of cheesecake, and a Coca-Cola. While strapped to the gurney, Littlejohn looked toward his mother, Sally Mason, and daughter, who were witnessing the execution. His last words were, "Everything is going to be okay. I love you." Before this, he asked his mother, "Mom, you okay?" To which she replied she was. His spiritual advisor, Reverend Jeff Hood, also read Bible passages during the procedure, including John 8:7, "Let he among you who is without sin cast the first stone." Kevin Ray Underwood, December 19, 2024. He was 45 years old at the time of his death. Underwood was convicted of the first-degree murder of his 10-year-old neighbor, Jamie Rose Bolin, on April 12, 2006, in Purcell, Oklahoma. He lured the girl into his apartment to play with his pet rat. While she was watching SpongeBob SquarePants, he struck her in the head with a wooden cutting board several times, and then he suffocated her to death. Following the murder, Underwood essayed the body and used a decorative dagger to attempt to decapitate her. He confessed to investigators he had planned for months to abduct, essay, and eat a victim's flesh as part of a long-standing fantasy. Her body was found 2 days later in a sealed plastic storage tub in Underwood's bedroom closet. Police also recovered meat tenderizers, skewers, and a tarp he had prepared for the intended cannibalism. According to reports, Underwood requested a large final meal that included a cheeseburger, chicken fried steaks, pinto beans, and a cola. While strapped to the gurney, a visibly emotional Underwood stated that the timing of his execution was needlessly cruel to his family, while offering an apology and expressing regret for his actions. Witnesses reported that he was crying silently as the lethal injection procedure began. He was pronounced dead at 10:14 a.m. local time. Wendell Arden Grissom, March 20, 2025. He was 56 years old and became the first inmate executed in Oklahoma in 2025. Grissom was convicted of first-degree murder for a random violent home invasion on November 3, 2005 in rural Blaine County. Grissom and an accomplice, Jesse Floyd Johns, targeted a home to commit a robbery. Grissom shot his way through a sliding glass door and attacked 23-year-old Amber Dawn Matthews and her friend Drew Koff. Amber Matthews was killed while attempting to protect Koff's two young children, aged 5 weeks and 19 months. Grissom chased her into a bedroom and shot her at close range in the head while she was holding the newborn baby. Drew Koff survived the attack despite being shot multiple times in the head, hip, and shoulder and hand. She managed to escape and flag down help while her kids were found unharmed. Grissom claimed he was under the influence of vodka and drugs and needed money. His accomplice, Johns, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. For his final meal, Grissom requested a fast food themed spread, a medium thick crust Canadian bacon supreme pizza, 1 pint of vanilla ice cream. He also requested and got 1 pint of Coke. In a lengthy final statement, Grissom expressed remorse and asked for forgiveness from the families of his victims. His final remarks included, "I apologize to all of you that I've hurt. I regret so much that I've put that hatred on your heart for me. It's still my fault. I'm not who I made myself look like that one day." He added that he considered the execution a mercy and told his supporters, "I'm going to be all right." Survivors who attended the execution, including Drew Koff, stated that while the apology seemed sincere, it came too late after 20 years of suffering. George John Hansen, June 12, 2025. Hansen was convicted for a 1999 crime spree in Tulsa that resulted in the deaths of 2 people. Mary Agnes Bowles was 77. Hansen and an accomplice, Victor Cornell Miller, carjacked and kidnapped a retired bank executive from a Tulsa shopping mall. They drove her to a secluded dirt pit near Owasso, where Hansen shot her 4 times. Her decomposed body was discovered more than a week later. Gerald Max Thurman was 44. He was a bystander and dirt pit owner who witnessed the man with Bowles' car. Miller shot Thurman, who died in a hospital 2 weeks later. Hansen was sentenced to death for the murder of Bowles and life without parole for his role in Thurman's death. Although Miller was the one who shot Thurman, Hansen was executed because he was identified as the shooter who killed Mary Bowles. Hansen's execution was notable due to a jurisdictional battle. He was serving a life sentence in a Louisiana federal prison for unrelated armed robberies when Oklahoma sought his transfer for execution. The transfer was blocked by the Biden administration, but later expedited by the Trump administration in March 2025. Hansen did not request a special last meal. He was served the standard prison meal of chicken pot pie, 2 rolls, 2 fruit cups, and carrots. While strapped to the gurney, Hansen spoke in a low voice. Media witnesses reported he said, "Just forgive me. Peace to everyone." Following the procedure, Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond stated that justice was finally served for the families after a 25-year wait. Kendrick Antonio Simpson, February 12, 2026. He was 45 years old and became the first person executed in Oklahoma in 2026. Simpson was convicted of the first-degree murders of 2 young men in Oklahoma City on January 15, 2006. Glenn Palmer was 20 and Anthony Jones was 19. Both victims were fatally shot while inside the vehicle following an altercation at a Northwest Oklahoma City nightclub. After a dispute at the club, reportedly over a Chicago Cubs baseball cap Simpson was wearing, Simpson and his friends followed the victims for over 3 miles. At a stop, Simpson fired nearly 20 rounds from a semi-automatic rifle into their car. A third man, London Johnson, survived the attack by crouching in the back seat and later testified against Simpson. During his trial, it was revealed that Simpson was a Hurricane Katrina evacuee who had moved to Oklahoma only months before the murders. His defense argued he suffered from PTSD due to his experiences in New Orleans and the trauma of being shot 5 times himself in a 2004 incident. For his last meal, Simpson requested a classic fast food feast, a bacon cheeseburger, large onion rings, and a strawberry milkshake. While strapped to the gurney, Simpson chose to address only his family and supporters rather than the victims' families. His last words were, "I love y'all. Thank y'all for being here to support me. I love y'all. That's it." Although he did not apologize at the execution, he had previously offered an apology during his January clemency hearing, stating, "I apologize for murdering your sons. I don't make any excuses, and they didn't deserve what happened to them." He was pronounced dead at 10:19 a.m. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.